Okay, so good afternoon. It's time to start. We have 15 minutes academic tolerance. My introduction was foreseen to be a little bit shorter. I don't know if we can show the agenda, but for today we will have a keynote speech that I will introduce very quickly. Then there were two panels for the INESC TEC side. You will see there was a lot of work in preparing the panels in terms of presentations. They will give a 5 minutes introduction, and then there will be around 40 minutes. There will be a discussion in the panel, but there are also questions from the audience. Because sometimes we forget all the staff that was helping organizing these. It's better to say in the beginning than in the end, otherwise we have the tendency to forget them in the end. But just to acknowledge the work of Renata Mota, Daniela Sá, Paula Castro, and Joana Coelho, because there was a lot of work in designing the slides and organizing all these events, and it's important to acknowledge them. Without any more delays, we'll move to the keynote speech that it's Professor Mladen Kezunovic. He has been with Texas A&M University for more than 35 years. He's a distinguished professor, Regents Professor, and Eugene E. Webb Professor. He's IEEE Fellow and SIGRE Fellow. And he's a leading expert in smart grids in areas such as protection systems, resilience, digitalization, and computational intelligence. He has been establishing a bridge between academia and industry. So on academia, I have been as a principal investigator in more than 100 R&D projects. Have been consultants for more than 55 utilities and companies, and he's principal of Expert Power Associates. And he's also spending part of his sabbatical period here at INESC TEC. So it's a pleasure to introduce Professor Mladen Kezunovic that will make a presentation about risk management, considering the ongoing electrification of the society and the economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope can you hear me?
Okay, boa tarde. And that's all I know in Portuguese. Maybe a few more words, ordering wine and food and things like that, but that's the extent, I'm sorry. Anyway, it's a pleasure to speak to you about this problem. I spent roughly last 10 years focused on this, working with industry. Unfortunately, we have limited time, so I will just highlight a few things here. So there are two keywords, if you will. One is massive electrification, and the other one is risk. And those two, unfortunately or fortunately, go together. Fortunately, if we know how to design everything, and unfortunately, if we don't. And so I will talk about that. This is my outline. I'll talk briefly about the goal, objective, approach, and action. But on the right-hand side, I want to set the stage how people are looking at this right now, primarily in the United States. So those two charts there come from NERC, North American Electric Reliability Corporation. They have Electricity Reliability Organization that has 6 members, cover the entire country, and coordinate reliability, and they define risks every year. Two things to observe. One is, irrespective of what it says there, the risk is changing. If you find one entry, you will see that it's not the same in 2021 and 2023, any entry. As a matter of fact, applies to all entries. And secondly, the priority also changes. This is obtained by survey. My point of this presentation is to somehow clarify this further, because as far as I'm concerned, this is not very clear. It's not clear in many ways. Now, I'm pretty sure in minds of people that came up with this, it's eventually clear. But from outside, what does it mean? Risk of situational awareness, for example. That's one of the entries. First of all, what does it mean, situational awareness, to start with? In the control room, there's only I see this and I do this, according to the rules. There's no I see this and I wonder. There's no concept like that. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no concept of situational awareness. Let it be a risk of it. But nevertheless, I will elaborate on some aspects of this that hopefully will help clarify some things. So now we know this, we're trying to reduce CO2 emissions, and electrification is one way. I found really nice 2 slides. Now, I cannot vouch for exact accuracy on the data on these slides, but I'm pretty sure it's on average pretty good. The one on the left-hand side talks about where the energy is used. And you can see percentage-wise, transportation is a large part, industry is a large part, and so on. The right-hand side is very, very interesting as far as I'm concerned. The colors that are light are what is the percent, or in this case, not the percent, but the value in quads. What is the use today of electricity? The darker color is what is expected in the future. So if you take transportation, very little is light, a lot is dark. And likewise for the, I may be able to read here better, for industrial, much more is expected to be electrified, and for the rest, like residential and so on, it's about 50% is electrified and the 50% is left yet to be electrified. So according to that, to cover all of this with electricity is a massive project. Because remember, all of this that is light there came about through 100+ years. So that was a big project to start with. So putting more is even bigger project. Now, I'm focusing for a moment on critical infrastructures. Up in the corner, Gartner defines critical infrastructures. I came up with a little chart from somewhere else because it's a simpler, and I want to emphasize a few things here. We live in an environment, as you know, that is tightly coupled with the infrastructures, critical infrastructures, from transportation to water and so on. Failures of the electrical system creates risk, therefore, across many critical infrastructures. Therefore, because of the electrification that is right now there and it's coming. Understanding the risk of failures of the grid, either partial or total failures, is an extremely important component of the analysis of how all of these things are going to interact. On the lower part, I will give you an example. February 21st, 2021 in Texas. It was very cold, and we lost 30% of the supply. That was a gas supply. Anybody who knows about the gas, many things can go wrong when it's cold. We lost, out of 20 million electrical customers, we lost about 4 million. Some were not recovered or restored as long as 3 or 4 days. The water customers, we lost over 10 million. This is potable water. And you may wonder why. Well, because ERCOT, our market operator, was rotating or issuing the order for rotation of the outages. Nobody knew what they are really rotating. So they were cutting off water pumps and emergency services and things like that. And of course, the built environment, the buildings and so on, lost electricity for as long as I mentioned. Fortunately, transportation is not electrified as much yet. If it was electrified, it would be interesting also to see what would have happened to that. Computers were tripped all over. It's not about businesses that have a backup. It's about schools and other facilities that don't have any backups, and you have to restore hundreds and if not thousands of computers, and so on. So, is there a risk there? Was there a risk? Of course, there was a risk. Was it anticipated? No, it wasn't. Nobody wanted that to happen. As a matter of fact, a lot of important heads rolled off, so to speak. The ERCOT CEO resigned. The Public Utility Commission CEO resigned. And down the road, plus many, many lawsuits, because there were problems with the market price at the time. They didn't trip as they call it, the price to be fixed. So they were charging enormous amounts to the users and so on. So it was a mess, let me put it that way, a real mess. And that is not the only mess that is occurring in the United States. I will mention a few other occasions. So the risk is what we're thinking about here, how to manage, how to mitigate. Now, this is a little bit about outages. They, you know, on average, it will appear as they are up to 2 hours on average or something like that in the United States. But these are averages, you know, who cares if an average is 2 hours if I'm losing it for 4 days? You know, and I am as important as anybody else is, right? So averages are fine. Okay, so some states are different in the United States, but those charts on the right-hand side that come from a reputable source, Energy Information Agency, are showing outages going up in time and in the impact on the customer. It's going up. So I focused on outages and the risks that the outages create in this context that I was talking about. So now, how do we identify, manage, and reduce the outage risk? The first thing to remember here is that defining the risk is not the end of the story. That's the problem with the NERC report. Defining mitigation measures, how to reduce the risk, is the end of the story. And that part is typically missing. Because if you interview a lot of people, they will say, oh, I think this is a risk to us, this is the risk to us. How are you going to manage that? Well, we have to think about it. So that's an issue there. So I have put a few up there. Weather. The weather is impacting, as you know, the grid, both long-term and short-term. Long-term, the equipment and everything else deteriorates over time. I don't know what you have in Portugal. We have in the United States, in some of the cities, major cities, equipment that is 80, 90 years old in service still. And then we have a short-term impact, which is associated with sudden storms, you know, wind, hail, whatever it is. And so one has to think about these two things being tied to each other, because if the equipment deteriorates, the insulation levels deteriorate. So if the lightning strikes, the equipment is going to fail more likely than otherwise, if it was new. In general, that is what the case is. The other one is AC-DC interfacing. I don't know how you feel about that. I feel we are totally on the new frontier with that. 150 plus years ago, AC won, as they used to say. There were DCs in special applications, DC links, high voltage links, and some other applications. DC is coming back into the picture big time through all of these utility scale power plants, through, you know, IBRs to down to the distributed energy resources. Do we know how to handle all of that? I submit to you that we do, but not that we do entirely, which creates the risk. Particularly when you have a disturbance, whether it's a fault or a frequency disturbance or anything like that, that impacts the inverter controls, and then the inverter controls impact the relaying. And the relaying trips when it shouldn't trip, for example. If you look at the NERC reports, we had really, really bad cases, as it happens to be in Texas too, and then in California, Arizona, and so on. And when everything was investigated, it was not entirely clear what was the problem. And eventually, the problem was traced down to bad controller designs, not good settings of the controllers, relay functions that are not adequate, and so on, all creating risk that was not either anticipated or understood fully. So that's an issue. Cyber physical, I don't need to tell you, that's always a risk. We don't understand enough the behavior of the people that may cause these problems, either intentionally or unintentionally. And I put intentionally privacy and trustworthiness together with that, because the privacy may also cause some issues in the operation, and how do we trust anything in the exchange between the grid operators and the third parties that don't have any obligation towards the grid, but own the resources. And exchange typically through the public, networks and things like that. Cyber decision-making complexity, we have new dynamics in the system. In the United States, we're discovering new frequencies due to sub 60 hertz frequencies, due to interaction of the inverters. And it used to be sub-hertz, and okay, so we discovered a few there. Then all of a sudden 11 hertz, 15 hertz, 13 hertz, and so on and so forth. And we don't know even where it is right now in some parts of the system. How does that affect relaying, for example? I don't know how much you know about digital relays, but digital relays are tuned to 60 hertz. So all of the algorithms used inside are assuming that it's a 60 hertz signal that is distorted by the transient. But if it's some other components that are not anticipated in the filtering part, then it may cause a problem. A big item, absolutely big in my judgment, is the behavioral economics aspect. That is how this third party, this huge group that owns resources and do not belong to the utility, how do they behave under various circumstances when they are either called upon to support the grid or called upon to manage their own resources. So those are some of the sources of this risk. Now, we can kind of summarize the strategies here to deal with everything. Capital investments, okay, we can reinforce the grid, we can put energy storage, this and that. We can decentralize controls, meaning everybody can isolate and survive, and then reconnect if needed. Those are some of the strategies. All of these require some additional capital investment. Of course, the question is where the money comes from, but that's a different story. In the United States, it's a very limited option. You cannot put transmission line, additional transmission line. You cannot put the storage of large scale. It's expensive. People are putting it in, but to justify, because as you know, the capital investments are recovered through the rate, through the Public Utility Commission. So you have to have a rate case approved that will, assure return on the investment for the utility, and that's not easy at all. Decision-making and control, think about it for a minute. The EMS and ADMS, EMS for transmission, ADMS for distribution, were invented in the late 60s EMS and late 70s ADMS. They evolved, obviously. But the basic principles that were introduced at that time are still active today. And so it's got to be that has to be upgraded significantly because we're facing different power system than what it was when this was designed. Now, we have this development with synchrophasers and synchronized sampling and so on, but it's very odd, this is all developed as a separate system today. And they are trying then to integrate the data. That is not the best solution for many reasons. First of all, you have separate infrastructures, control infrastructures. The more infrastructures, the more failure possibilities. And secondly, it just doesn't operate together. And so sometimes the things even act against each other. So I will focus on one aspect of the decision and control, which is prediction. Prediction of outages. And I'll bring you to that a little bit more. There are a lot of regulatory issues that are still outstanding down there. We're moving in the United States slowly in this area. Recently, FERC issued Order 2222, which not only allows but requires the market operators to take the flexible load into consideration for ancillary services. But it doesn't put any constraints of any sort, which means the participation is very small, incentives are very small as of now, and yet the flexible load is one of the main mitigation measures for the system conditions, in my judgment. And so not getting them fully engaged requires further work, regulatory and legislative work. Now, how to mitigate? First of all, we are all used to what we call the first principle, the physical system models. And we are good with models and all of that, but we don't have everything modeled at the required accuracy. The planning studies, for example, in the United States that are done for IBR penetration at the high voltage level are not considering controllers and relaying in any great detail, because they say, well, you know, that's later on when we deploy. Well, in the planning study, you're making decisions. How would you, for example, model interaction between grid following and grid forming inverters if they are mixed in one system? And how would you study if there is an interoperability issue? After a while, you're changing certain ones and putting certain other ones with different controls. And that is very realistic scenario. That is not taken into account. We need to think proactively, meaning prediction. We need to say, I can predict the risk, whichever way I do that, and then the notion of prediction is that you have time to implement mitigation measures. Time. Because the predictions are on a time horizon as well as spatial horizon, so you can tell for which area you're doing that. Now we're coming back to something that is not used as much today. That is the historical data on what has happened over time, particularly with equipment failures and things like that. That is a very rich database in the United States because each utility is required to maintain the record for various regulatory reasons. Some companies are even maintaining it for 20 years. We're doing some work with utilities. One has a record of 20 years, the other one of 15 years, and so on. And it's unused resource for risk assessment. It's not used today. And so we are combining data models based on historical data with the physical models based on what we do today. And that combination of the two has a powerful impact on prediction of the outages. If we don't have everything readily available to predict, we could at least develop digital twins, which are in a sense a prediction, but it's a real-time prediction. What it means, let's say I have a synchrophaser system, just for the sake of it. I can develop digital twin of it. I can look at what's happening with the path of regular data collection, and I can put the same data into the digital twin, which is supposedly digital twin. Behaves the same way as the system. And I can see whether I have discrepancies. And I can check that at various levels, substation, communication channel, PDCs, and at centralized point. By the way, this is a very powerful tool for cybersecurity intrusion detection. That's one of the risks that one can mitigate. We need to automate as many decisions as we can. We will never, as far as I'm concerned, well, never is a hard word, but never in my lifetime, let's put it that way, we will never automate entirely. But automating is good. Automating doesn't mean that you eliminate the operator. You know, when you fly the airplane, they have automated pilots, but they also monitor what's happening. They are sitting there over the ocean, you know, 3 of them looking at it all the time. Well, 2 of them, one is asleep typically, so. We need to develop understanding of the underlying sciences of data modeling and physical modeling and combination. And we need to use market incentives for mitigation. So what is the approach? We first have to model the, when did we start, by the way? Because this clock is running without telling me when we started. 5. That's going to be tricky. But anyway, modeling of the state of risk. So here's, I've been showing this before. So this is a basic model over to the left-hand side. If you would follow clockwise this model, please. So we define the hazard function, which is based on prediction of weather, because weather impacts everything in the power systems. So we define that as a probability of inclement weather that is going to potentially cause a problem. Then we define vulnerability, which is conditional probability of that weather causing failure in the system. So that's vulnerability. And then the economic impact, if we opt for economic impact or any other impact. And we then get the risk function. So the risk function is multiplication of hazard, vulnerability, and impact. So it's not a simple probability function. It's quite complicated, and you can make it much more complicated than this. I simplified this. So that's definition that takes into account weather, something that is pretty stochastic, takes into account failures in the system through vulnerability that is described by the data models, and then the impact, which is important in the risk assessment. Now, weather comes from different sources, so it's not simple to predict weather. Fortunately, most of these sources are free of charge in the United States. There are specialized networks like a lightning detection network, for example. You have to pay for that. But we have it, and there are different forecasts coming out of the digital database. We modify all of this. The advantage is having the data. Disadvantage is it's not ready for our purposes, so it has to be pre-processed. Other causes, if it's animals, if it's fires, if it's whatever it is, there are databases for that on the right-hand side. And very odd databases. For example, we have a database in Texas where we can identify every single tree in Texas, where it is and what species it is. Every single tree. And so if I cut around the feeders, I know exactly what's there, how fast it grows. If I know the soil, if I know the humidity, if I know the water precipitation and so on, I can calculate easily how it grows, which we did. Then, economic impact it depends on what the user perceives as an impact. How to manage and mitigate risk? Well, there are two steps, and this is probably the most important slide, and it's incidentally almost closing slide, but the most important, it's simple. In the first part is, let's get the prediction of the risk. The risk, by the way, is represented in a spatial and temporal domain using GIS, Geographic Information System. So there's a system down there, there's a risk on the top. Remember, the risk consists of the hazard and vulnerability. All those maps are developed in GIS, multiplied and superimposed on the grid. So it's very visual. You see red where higher risk and green where it's lower risk. Whatever you took into account in these layers of data. The second part is very, very interesting. When you have the risk, you have two options and might pursue them simultaneously. One option is for the utility company to warn its staff to get prepared, whether it's a maintenance, whether it's a restoration control, or whatever it is. The other path is down below to inform the consumer, the customer. Today, there's no such a concept. Today, when there's an outage, utility runs over to restore, puts everything on the website so people can see what is out and how the recovery is going. But there's no prediction telling me, listen, you may have an outage in the next 3 hours that will last for 2 hours. And this is the mitigation measures for you that you may want to pursue if you wish. That doesn't exist today. Remember, mitigation reduces the risk. This is what it is all about. Now, the mitigation is an optimization process. So you can put an objective function or whatever you want. You can put an objective function. Let's reduce the risk by maintaining the same budget. So if it's a cutting trees or something like that, go and cut where it's the highest risk, but don't cut more than what money you have. The other one is turn over to the customer and say, well, mitigate so that the side fee is reduced. That doesn't mean the same thing as the utility cost that I was mentioning. So one needs to define that and optimize the recovery. Finally, here we are. The left-hand side is a model that people use today, calling it resilience. I still don't know what the resilience is. I read every report that there is on resilience, every paper that I got my hands on, and I'm confused. But it's me, okay? Maybe you all know exactly what it is. The basic idea that I understand is, well, you know, do something with the system so that it doesn't go down to red. And then if it does go down to red, try to recover. Well, what is the risk of going into red? We are offering a risk function. How do I recover? we offering mitigation function, and what all of this has cost, we offering that as a part of the risk function. So I can easily define, I guess I can call it resilience, but it's my resilience, I suppose. Why would I call it that way? Because everybody is calling it resilience. Whether they know exactly what it means or not, resilience is the term that is used in the United States widely. So I would call it resilience for that reason, but I would actually associate it with the mitigation measure, first of all, risk prediction, right? And then the mitigation measure and the optimization process to reduce the impact of a particular risk. So that's how we see it. We see it developing for all of the grid components. I had slides on metrics, I have slides on implementation and so on, but due to time constraint, I took them out. And I believe that's the end of what I wanted to convey. I hope it makes sense to you as much as it does to me, but it's open out there for discussion. So I'm open for any questions, or am I good with the time? All right. Any questions, please? Got to be questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yes, what I would direct everybody who is interested, I gave a talk at INESC, when was it? A few weeks ago, I guess it was, where we discussed about implementations of this. So there's a deck of slides describing. But I can tell you this, what's happening. We are working I come from industry originally, and I run consulting firm and so on. So I'm closely associated with industry all the time. Half of my projects, even more, are funded by industry. So we are dealing with actual data in the project. So we moved a few years back when we started all of this from the investor-owned company, because it's a different beast, in Houston, and developed for them one application for vegetation management. Then we moved over to the north, south of Dallas, north of us, to a co-op organization, which is owned by the members, and developed something for them where the wind was primarily the problem, because it blows pretty hard in that area. That was the major risk. And now we are in the in the municipally owned utility company, the largest in the country, actually second largest if we look at the overall United States. The largest is in Puerto Rico, but in the continental is the largest, is the CPS Energy in San Antonio, and we are developing this for them right now. So there is experience in this that is firsthand, and there are more questions, by the way, through these 10 years than answers, okay? I don't want to leave you with the impression. However, we're filing patents, and we're getting inquiries about commercialization. So where it's going to go, I don't know. But everything that we implemented is based on real utility data. And so, as I said, those slides. By the way, if you go to my website, you can type in my name and it will pop up. All of the papers that we published are downloadable. So you can download them, and they are organized by categories and so on. There's a copyright notice, but that's okay. You can download freely. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for an interesting lecture. I work in a DSO, so from the DSO point of view, we've been doing some of this research also, together with INESC. Sometimes we had some questions related to the solutions that we're thinking of that can help us reducing risk and enhancing resilience. One of them is using customers as a source of flexibility, for instance. But then aren't we sometimes transferring the risk to another place and just doing that? Because there's some solutions might have their own risks also. So if we rely upon customer flexibility, we're not 100% sure that we'll have it available when we need it. How can we solve this almost catch-22 situation?
Well, it is to an extent. However, in my view, and again, you know, I'm viewing it the way I am saying let's first define the risk across the board. And then let's talk about who mitigates, where do we shift the responsibility. Let's talk about that then. In our case, in the United States, the public utility commissions that are responsible eventually for approving things do not have this concept yet on their table. Of course, they heard about it, they're asking about it, they came to our presentations, they go into other places. There are other people doing this, of course, you know, across the United States. But there is no definition of the risk that everybody agrees, and there is no calculation of the risk. Once people, in my judgment, once people identify real causes of risk and real impacts, it would be much easier to allocate the responsibilities. And what may come out is that when people understand what's going on, that some risks are not easy to mitigate, therefore, we need to assume losses. And so the discussion turns after that point into who pays what. And regulators and legislators in Texas, as it happens to be, have to decide on some of these aspects. But so my point is, you mitigate up to the point, you understand what the mitigation options are, you decide who is going to pick it up and do it, and then when it cannot be further mitigated, then you decide who is going to pay the loss. And that's the approach that we are suggesting to our Public Utility Commission. Now, you know, where it's going to go, I'm not sure. But that component, that analysis is missing. I mean, it's missing in NERC, it's missing in the utility commissions, it's just missing. And we need to get them to look into that first. Other questions? I think we have time for a few more. One or two more. By the way, I cannot see in the back, while you're thinking potentially, please don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that this, whatever it is, you know, should substitute what we have. I'm pretty sure you understood that this would complement what we have. We would do what we're doing, and we're doing it reasonably well, and this would just give us an additional tool to deal with the situations that we are facing. There's a question somewhere, I see the motion, yes.
Thank you, Professor, for your presentation. Is it acceptable, or could be acceptable or not, to take in the consideration of the risks let's say, this more conservative view that the operators have, or it was something valid before, not so valid today, but they are resistant to new solutions, to new approaches, or things that are using big data, or let's say artificial intelligence. I'm saying this because we work with protection, and the protection field, the system protection field is very conservative, or it was. Maybe it's more valid for transmission than distribution, but we see that they are, let's say, resistant to very new things or very disruptive things. So, do you think this is something acceptable to take on the risk equation, or it is spread through the other aspects of the risk? What would be your view?
This is how I think about it, you know, and risk needs to be assessed so that everybody, including operators, understand what is the risk of not taking measures about the risk. Because when that is known, then it's very hard to reject something, very hard, if it offers a solution. Now, a different pair of shoes is convincing people that something works. That's a totally different pair of shoes. And what we have offered at our place, we have a full-blown control room and back room and substation room and all of that. We said, why don't we install this at our place? We run it at our place for 2 years, for you, with your data. And we feed back the operators with the data from our implementation of that, and you just track what it does. And when you get convinced, then, you know, maybe you will take over. Now, a component is interpretable AI, can you interpret? What people are forgetting here, I've noticed in the literature, is that we have an advantage. We're dealing with a physical system. So if I was predicting outages here and there and so on over time, I can predict them back in time. I can say, where would the outage occur in 2021 under these circumstances and compare to what actually has happened. And I can do this going forward, and therefore the confidence may be developed. Incidentally, I wouldn't start necessarily with the operators using this, because the operators have the most critical function in the power system to keep it going. I would start it with asset management, outage management, functions like that, to get a little bit of a acceptance within the utility company. So if asset management and outage management people which are, so to speak, offline people anyway, right? So it's not a critical decision necessarily immediately, then I would move it over to operations, and I would also move it slowly. As you know, operations is, day ahead, hour ahead, 5 minutes ahead, and so on. I would push it to day ahead and see what they are getting in a day ahead, rather than pushing it down to when the decision has to be made. And then gradually, hopefully, it will trickle in. So those are some of the approaches that's what I'm suggesting to the consulting clients that I have when they ask these questions. That's what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
Do we have time for one more, or? No, we're done. Okay, thank you very much then. I appreciate it.
Yes?
Not yet.
Okay. So I have a big challenge here. We are going to talk about the challenges towards the electricity sector decarbonization. However, I'm lucky enough to have some experts to support me on that. So first of all, Professor João Peças Lopes, full professor at PhilP, associate director at INESC TEC, IEEE fellow member and Tech4C responsible, Tech for Energy, sorry. Could you please join me on stage, Professor? Thank you. Okay, then I'll have Dr. Clara Gouveia, which is a senior researcher at INESC TEC and member of INESC TEC board. Then Dr. José Vilar, who is senior researcher at INESC TEC also, and responsible for the area of energy markets. And finally, Dr. Zenaida Mourão, which is here. Okay, Zenaida, senior researcher and specialist on multi-energy systems. So, for start, I would ask Professor Peças Lopes to do a small presentation of his team, please.
So, good afternoon to all of you. So let's talk a bit about challenges towards 100% renewables with the same grid resilience as we have today. So, in fact, there are very ambitious targets regarding renewable energy sources integration for the coming years. So we will see that renewable sources like solar power, wind power will increase largely, and so this means that thermal units will be decommissioned. And it may happen that in the future, many hours of the year we will have almost no synchronous units in operation in the system. And so this means that we will have stability problems due to the fact that inertia of the system will be reduced. And this means that we may have to deal with different types of stability problems, like converter-driven stability, which is a completely different class of problems that may happen in the system. And therefore, this requires a careful assessment of the stability. I can show you here. So the way how the frequency excursions in terms of nadirs and rate of change of frequencies may behave in the system following a large disturbance. And we can see it in terms of going from 2020 to 2040 and during the different months of the year. And we can see that the worst cases may arrive during, for instance, the May. So because so there's the superposition of large solar PV generation together with a lot of wind power. So this means we need to address very carefully these problems. And therefore, we need to find out solutions to cope with all these stability issues that the system has to face. So I would say that the first solution would be in order to face the sudden reduction of inertia in the systems, to increase that inertia through synchronous condensers. And these synchronous condensers could be just thermal units that are being decommissioned and that have to be revamped, and together with a flywheel on the shafts, and used to provide inertia through the system. And so we would get a much better behavior of the system if we increase inertia from these synchronous condensers. But we may also start using different forms of control of the power electronic converters, like the grid forming one. So this can be used in renewable energy sources, units, and of course in batteries. And here you can see the electromechanical oscillations from some synchronous machines together with the behavior of the grid forming converters when they provide frequency to the system, control of the frequency to the system. See, this also means the provision of new ancillary services, like synthetic inertia, fast frequency reserve, to be provided by the renewable energy sources converters, by ultracapacitors, battery converters. The activation of demand response. This is something that will pop up in the coming years due to the presence of some flexible loads, like e-mobility, like thermal loads, like electrolyzers. So electrolyzers are supposed to be a very large load in a few years from now, say even gigawatts of load from electrolyzers. And so this means a large load, flexible load that can provide flexibility to the system, and so the activation of this demand response. But also the participation in frequency control from energy storage systems like batteries, hydro pumping stations. So all these services will be available. Additionally, we may start requiring additional requirements for generation in some those renewable energy sources converters, like for instance, limited grid forming, which is something that may happen in a few years from now. This is presently under research. It is to say that so even solar PV converters, they can provide grid forming characteristics up to a certain level, And if the load increases largely, therefore they would be limited in that grid forming operation. And in order to see how to dimension all those ancillary services, we will need to use kind of digital twins. And I'm showing you a digital twin of the Iberian system interconnected with the Central European system, where it is possible to model the different renewable energy power responses and the different technologies of generation, together with also some of the demand that is capable to respond to frequency variations. And what we are showing you here is exactly the way our frequency will behave following a very large disturbance, and the way it can be improved if we use, for instance, fast frequency response. So this means that it's important to have this type of tools to dimension these new ancillary services. But also very important is to understand that the operation of the grid is becoming more complex. The dimension of the system is huge, and therefore system operators will have to face big challenges, and they will need tools to do the fast stability assessment and even to try to control the system when instability is detected. Here, what I'm showing you is one of the structures that can be used by using artificial intelligence techniques. In this case, this is a decision tree, but we can use other tools of this type, like regression trees or artificial neural networks, and we can do the backtracking on those structures to try to identify the control measures that can be redispatches, synchronous condensers mobilization, and also in the artificial neural networks we can do it via the sensitivity analysis of the output regarding the inputs. So I would say that the future is quite challenging, but we have the tools, we will have the solutions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Now I would pass the word to Clara, which will talk about the innovative developments in distribution systems.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So Professor Pastorlovs talked about the challenges and what will look like the future grid when integrating this large number and this large amount of inverter-based resources. I will talk about what will look like the electricity grids and the systems that are required to operate and manage them. And so, considering this large amount of renewable generation, the operation will need to deal with increased uncertainty besides these new phenomena that are associated to inverter-based generation. And so, we need to start by rethinking network control centers. And we are not just talking about transmission, we are also talking about distribution. So we need to transform the way grids are operated towards more predictive, as we have seen from the first presentation, but also with the capability of doing this kind of simulation. So we talk about also multi-domain system simulation, so that the operator can study, can try to assess what is the impact of these different resources, not only for training, but also for supporting operation planning. Of course, this means that network operator will need to do some predictive operation planning, but will also need to improve its response in real time. And this is not possible as the way we do it today, just looking at the status of the network and deciding what to do based on some kind of guidelines. We need to have improved tools for decision making. And with those amount of resources that are not just connected at transmission, but also connected at the consumers and at the distribution networks, it means that the network operators need to improve its coordination with TSOs, with electricity markets, ancillary markets, local flexibility markets, but also inside their systems and between the different voltage levels. So they need to improve coordinated management and control. And this cannot be done without improved observability. And this is not just real-time monitoring, it's also improved forecasting, and it's also the capability of learning from historical data and incorporating this historical data in forecasting and also in decision making. And finally, as we also discussed, we need to improve automated control and decentralized control. And so we need improved distribution automation and control with decentralized voltage and reactive power control, congestion management, but also with some very innovative solutions for digital substation. And this, in fact, is really transforming the way we can see future distribution and also network automation. So the architecture based on IEC 61850, together with distributed computation capabilities, is really developing a new generation of solutions for distribution and for network automation. And I give you here an example of what is a centralized protection system. We are basically virtualizing the conventional IEDs or digital relays of the network and putting these critical functions and critical equipment in a single server at the substation, of course, with redundancy. We could even think of completely virtualized protection and automation systems. And this, although it seems a bit futuristic, in fact, it has a lot of advantage, not only in cost, but also on cybersecurity and potentially on improving the distributed decentralized control at the substation level, but also allowing to integrate information from the devices connected in the distribution network. And we are talking about distributed generation, protection relays, we are talking about network automation at the feeders, and using this information at the substation level and not at the DMS level. And so we can think of a new generation of automation. We can really filter what is happening in the network and at the substation and provide more information to the network operator, already focused on the cause and not on a sequence of events. We can really improve automatic voltage regulation and the coordination with distributed generation units connected at the high voltage or medium voltage networks. But we could even think of adaptive protection that can adapt really to the network operating conditions, because we have more information and we have improved computational capabilities to adapt closely to the conditions of the network. And so, but the transformation does not come only from the network operator, neither the technologies that are applied in the network. So we see a great amount of these new resources connected to the distribution networks. They are not owned by the network operators. They are owned by end users, but they have flexibility that can be used to support grid operation. And there we have a new generation of services that are not just congestion and voltage management as we have seen for transmission, but we can also think on critical emergency support to disturbances on the network. We can even talk about maintenance support planning of these resources. And there I would like to point out two of these technologies that are energy storage and microgrids. So we have talked about microgrids, particularly in this group, for a long time, but actually it is in fact already a solid technology, but it still has a lot of challenges and opportunities to work on for the future. So microgrids will be, I think, one of the key technologies to enable a safe integration of distributed generation at the distribution network, but also to enable this participation in these local flexibility markets, in ancillary service markets, and also to contribute to decarbonization of industry because of this capability of combining the management of electrical and thermal loads, but also to incorporate these new technologies as electrolyzers, as thermal energy storage in the local management of these systems. And there we have still some work to do. We need to incorporate these new services that we were talking about to provide support to the grid, and we need also to extend its topology to AC/DC networks and study how this can be connected to the system. So in 5 minutes, I try to bring the main challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you very much. Now I will pass the word to José Vilar, which will talk us about to what extent markets can help on achieving these challenges and goals.
Thank you, Bernardo. So to talk about this in 5 minutes is obviously impossible. So we just try to give a very brief overview on recent and ongoing evolution of electricity markets, highlighting advantages and disadvantages, and looking where we are going now. So the regulation brought at the wholesale level electricity markets where producers willing to sell their energy are matched with suppliers that buy their energy to supply their customers, or to match also with large consumers, large enough to participate in the market. This gives as a result an electricity hourly market price. The advantages of such a market are basically that they allow to reveal the real cost of producing the electricity, and they also bring efficiency due to competition. They provide adequate signals, price signals for balance, for imbalances, for flexibility, and for investments. And they shape behaviors to the scarcities of the system due to exactly the scarcity prices. And finally, when new scarcities are detected, new markets can be designed to supply these scarcities in a market-based approach. We also have disadvantages. Obviously, we know that when there is low competition, we get oligopolistic situation where a few players are able to modify the market outcomes in their favor, and this is increased when there are entry barriers, especially for small players. Price volatility is also a disadvantage because it provides uncertainty that may disincentivize investments, and also grid constraints can distort energy markets. And finally, obviously, wrong regulation can provide wrong investment signals, and it is important to supervise the performance of markets to adapt the regulation, but without providing regulatory uncertainty, which is also something that disincentivizes participation. Then if we go to the retail market, the retail market is not a spot market, so we don't have hourly prices. The retail market, what does is to match consumers with suppliers that offer them contracts, supply contracts with different tariff structures. And these allow customers to choose among different alternatives. These also provide them with some possible elasticity because they can choose between different prices, and they get aware also of the electricity prices. But this needs awareness and energy literacy, and also this competition of the retail market also helps to increase this energy literacy. There are also obviously complications. It is important to have smart metering everywhere, because otherwise the imbalance responsibility cannot be properly allocated to the retailers. Market price complexities in the contracts and so on can disincentivize this competition because consumers won't get aware of the different alternatives they have. We have also seen a problem of low supplier entry barriers, which has caused, for example, in the last energy crisis, unsustainable businesses and suppliers that went bankrupt. So this is something that leave consumers without protection. But too protective regulation also can disincentivize new business, especially, for example, in the case of suppliers that negotiate with several different cross-sector commodities. If we look at the effect that renewables has on the electricity market, what we see here is the aggregate demand curve and the aggregate supply curve. And in the aggregate supply curve, what we have at the beginning is the lowest price bits. So these correspond to base load and most run units and renewable generation. Then we have typically mid-range, which are now combined cycles. And at the end, we have peaking units and dispatchable generation. And the increment of renewable generation in the market, what it does is to add energy at very low prices. So this moves this curve to the right. And the effect is to decrease the price, the intersection was here, to decrease the price and to increment the quantity of supplied energy. Going back to the markets and looking at what is ongoing now, what we see is that first, we had investments in renewable generation, not only at the utility scale, but also at the consumer's level, and this has been incentivized by the self-consumption regulation. We have the possibility also, due to the collective self-consumption regulation, to establish local electricity markets. We are also seeing the increment of new renewable distributed energy resources. So, for example, cross-sector resources such as electric vehicles or thermal loads, and this allows the possibility to make the final customers more flexible and to use this flexibility to be contracted by an aggregator and to be, for example, offered at the wholesale electricity market, but also at local flexibility markets to help in the operation of DSOs. These turn final consumers into active players in the electricity market. This also increase energy literacy, increase decentralized RES investment, the renewable generation investments, and improve also local balancing, unlocking the flexibility of the consumers, and can also develop new disruptive business and the appearance of new players. Obviously, this also has complexity. It is needed to integrate this local peer-to-peer market or this local flexibility market with the wholesale market, and this has relevance in the allocation of the imbalances. These local markets can have important implementation cost, low economies of scales, need strong digitalization and automation, and this could avoid the benefits of implementing this market. And also there is the problem of grid constraint, and finally consumers' engagement and the complexity of designing such markets and the regulatory challenges that this brings also. So from my side, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jose. Now I would invite Zenaida Mourão to talk about the challenges on demand-side management.
Thank you so much. So I will start with a number, which is more than 80% of all the energy that goes into our energy system is actually wasted. Okay, so this is the importance of why we should look at demand and why we should look at what we are delivering as a final service in the energy system. Okay, so we are dimensioning most of what we are doing for something that is mostly wasted. This also is related with this new landscape of how we look at demand-side management in buildings specifically, which is what I'm here today to talk about, and why the focus has shifted to managing the energy use directly and more to what is the benefit of what we get from the energy. So in the future, we will look more and much more at buildings and at energy in buildings in a sense of the end user. It's consumer-centric. It is built for people, which means basically we are building systems for providing comfort in the building, for example. We are also looking at problems that exist currently, which is our energy services are not at the level they should be. So we have things, for example, like energy poverty. In Portugal, this is quite a big problem. We're also looking at healthy buildings, healthy environments, both within the building as well as outside the building. And there is interaction here. And there is also interaction in how these systems are going to transition, okay? So we need to make the environments inside the buildings more comfortable and more healthy. And we also need to, at the same time, change the system outside of the buildings to make it more healthy. That means, for example, we are concomitantly changing also mobility and industry, okay? And all of this influences what you then feel inside a building. They will be in the future more active or participative. This goes to also a lot of the things that Jose was talking about. So we need to make, currently buildings are at the end of a very long chain of transformations, and they are mostly passive in the sense that they do not interact directly with the grid or with the rest of the energy system or even with the other sectors. And in the future, this will be possible. So it will be possible for, as Jose was showing that, so we need to make customers active. We need to be able to also activate certain types of services, and this needs the participation from the end users. This needs to be the participation of the buildings. So the buildings need to be able to see the system, and the system needs to be able to see the buildings as dynamic entities. This also means that the customers or the end users need to be able to access these services in a different way, not just as paying customers of getting a bill at the end of the month, but also as being able to knowing exactly how they're consuming energy and how they can basically participate in the system in a different way. And of course, here we also have a change that is ongoing, which is the emergence of decentralized energy systems. So they're no longer just passive consumers, they're also producers. They're also producers of electricity and of heat. And you can think of this at the level of the user with the building, but the buildings also as a part of an ecosystem, interacting with each other, interacting with the grid, interacting with mobility, and even with industrial systems, if that's a possibility. Moving on as well, so we have this big question on whether in the future we will have massive electrification of buildings, or if there will be some coexistence with multi-energy systems. That means, for example, will there be some space also for things like hydrogen? There definitely probably is going to be quite a bit of space for heat networks. This is already a reality in northern countries, for example, and for hydrogen probably in countries where we have very big gas networks. This might be also a coexisting electrification with the change to hydrogen, but this will mean that we'll have an additional level of complexity because you will have these different systems interacting with each other and different customers also being able to access these different vectors. Then we have finally net zero. Net zero means a lot of things. Okay, so it means that we are transitioning to a net zero carbon economy, okay, a net zero carbon system. But it also means that we will have the boundaries at which we consider zero energy buildings or net zero energy buildings also means that you have to balance what you consume with what you can produce either locally or import from the grid. And this is also written into regulation, and by 2050 all buildings need to be zero energy. Okay, this means not only what exists today, which will still be here mostly in 2050, all the new buildings will also be built to those standards. And here, the biggest challenge would be to retrofit everything that already exists. And maybe just another number, which probably most of you or many of you know, which is 80% of everything that still exists today in terms of building stock and building infrastructure will still be here in 2050. So this is quite a challenge. And finally, also looking at this from the net zero perspective, we're not just looking at how we transition in terms of operational energy use, but also in terms of life cycle energy use. Okay, so all of these different dimensions will now coexist in terms of how we look at demand side management in buildings. How do we, so some of the enablers, let's say, of this transition, or some of the things we can do in the system to allow us to make this transition. So most of the operational energy use is linked to how occupants of buildings and users use the buildings. Okay, we can build them to the best of all standards, but still it's very difficult to predict exactly the energy use just from the physical models of buildings. Okay, so the occupant behavior is very important. So this means that if we can develop better physical and physical models, which are of course also fed with machine learning models and AI, we can better forecast energy consumption or energy demand in buildings, but we can also do this in a more automated way. Okay, so this automated building control without direct intervention from the users is also something that would allow us to move a bit closer to the system that we want. And of course, being able to develop these models and test them in a very sort of fast cycle is also something that is important. So living labs, which we have quite a few here in Portugal and throughout Europe, will also allow us to have a faster cycle of developing these models, which will allow us, of course, to have better prediction of what the demand is. And of course, this is important when we're moving towards this zero energy system, which can be, as we looked at the level of the building, at the level of the neighborhood, at the level of the city, because of course, we need to make sure that the consumption matches as much as possible what we can produce, and as all of the system is moving towards more renewables, both at the centralized level as well as at the decentralized levels. Again, here, the importance of these accurate predictions of what we can do at the level of demand, of how much we're producing in terms of renewable electricity and renewable energy, and also at the level of how we can shift part of that consumption to match the production that we have. This is very much done not just with the goal of the energy side, but also with the goal of always maintaining healthy indoor environments. Okay, so this will be the focus, which means basically we need to maintain certain levels of temperature, which are of course variable depending on how you occupy and how you use the building. And also, this has also been mentioned here, this interaction between electrical and thermal systems, and namely here, for example, using buildings as thermal storage in the system. Oh, sorry. Okay, so the other key point here, the other key development that we need to have, and this was already mentioned and pointed out by my colleagues, is massive digitalization. Okay? We cannot do this without digitalizing our end users and our buildings. And as you know, currently it's most of the users don't even know how much energy or how they use energy throughout, for example, the day, throughout the week, or throughout the month, or even the year. Okay, so we receive an energy bill at the end of the month, and that's most of the knowledge that people have about the energy use. So enabling, in a way, having a way of first knowing exactly how much we use and how we use energy, but at the same time being able to act on it. Okay, so this is the second step of being able to act on it, means that we have to have platforms and systems that allow us to talk to our different systems within a building, okay? And so here we have, this typically doesn't happen, right? So it's really difficult. We don't have a plug and play app that we can just basically connect all of the different appliances and equipment that we have in a building. And it's much more difficult to then act on those systems, okay? So this is also all of the work that's being done behind, let's say, the system to basically create a sort of a language where all of these systems can communicate, and to also enable then for these systems to be all acted on is some of the work that needs to be done, and some of the work that's underway, and which is to basically create interoperable systems, which then become also plug and play systems. And of course, the importance of this is to enable flexibility, to enable us to automatically or to receive signals from the grid and then to shift consumption.
Zinaida, 1 more minute, please.
One?
It was 5 minutes in total.
Oh, it's over?
Yes.
I just have this one, last one.
Yes.
Okay. And then as a last one, this is something I mentioned initially, we have to really think about how users use these interfaces, okay? So this is something that is quite important, because typically they're not really very easy to use. And so in the future, this is something that also will be, the interfaces will be very easy to, in principle, to use. And of course, the kind of incentives that users respond to are not necessarily just the economic incentives, but also environmental and social incentives. And this will, in principle, lead us to increased participation in flexibility and demand response. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry.
Right, so let's have a round of small debate here. And I will start by Professor Peças Lopes, which said something that thrilled me a little bit. You said May was the worst month, the less resilient. We are in May, and the lights are still on, and we are finishing that. So this opens the floor for my first question, which is, how urgent do you think those new ancillary services are for the power system?
Okay, thank you for the question. So I believe that from what I presented, you understood that we may have situations, operating conditions where the inertia will be quite reduced in the system, will bring to deviations in frequency of the ones like the ones that I just mentioned, but only if some disturbances take place. If no disturbances happen, the system will run smoothly. But of course, we need to be prepared for that, and this means that these services are required. Otherwise, if something happens, we may really black out the system, which of course we don't want. And inertia will be really critical. As a matter of fact, Iberia is an almost highland in Europe, and this is something that we must understand, and therefore is really a critical network inside the European grid. So this means that inertia will become more critical inside Iberia than in other parts of Europe, and therefore we need to increase inertia in some operating conditions. Not only synchronous inertia, but also synthetic inertia from power electronic converters. So this is very important. Of course, that then we need to think how to make it happen, right? And of course that, for instance, frequency containment reserve, or if you prefer, primary frequency control, is something that is presently used in Iberia, is a mandatory service, as a matter of fact, while in other parts of the European network is a remunerated service paid according to market rules. So what I think is that in the future, those market approaches will also become through in the Iberia, for those services, I mean.
Okay, so taking that, I'd like to ask to José Vilar, the market, how do you think the market can help on this part of system support services, and how to remunerate that?
I mean, markets are already being used to procure many system services. So this is something that is, from the beginning of the electricity market, many ancillary services are being procured by electricity markets. What happens is that when some of the products are not scarce, and you can even have them with a mandatory scheme and without remuneration. But as Professor was saying, there are some products that are going to become scarce. For example, inertia is going to be one of them, and it will probably be well procured in market-based systems. I would say that when you have very local problems with only a few local resources that can provide a solution, then probably markets have no sense because there is no liquidity. But in the rest of the cases, markets are good options to obtain cost-efficient solutions for this kind of products.
Okay. And taking this local aspect, Clara, I would like to ask, in distribution grids, more players are coming, more players are connecting, and the operation will be very, very, very complex, as you showed. What tools do we have, or will we have in the future for the DSOs?
I think the DSO systems are evolving, and the we see an evolution of the commercial to integrate forecast and so on, but we still have this typical centralized, and then you have automation and protection. And so you don't have this integration between what will be the advanced distribution management system with the possibility of having this decentralized control and a clear integration of the participation of the distributed resources, either on ADMS or even in local automation. So this is in fact a big challenge for the operator, because we are talking about integrating thousands of different connection points that have different requirements and that they need to incorporate on their systems. At the same time, internally, they really need to have a horizontal integration of data. And this is also challenging because we probably don't have the same provider for all the systems, from DMS to OMS, from SCADA, from GIS, and for maintenance. And so this is really a big challenge.
But do you think that standardization could solve this problem?
Standardization is a path that is being followed for several years, but is really slow.
Okay.
I would say that now it's coming to some results, and you can see a wider adoption of IC 61850. You see an attemptive of a wide adoption of SIEM for the centralized systems, but we really need to push this forward, because then we need to integrate those resources and establish communication between the DSO and those systems. On the other hand, if we talk about decentralized control and advanced automation, maybe we are trying to also have network modeling at different systems, at the substation level and at the centralized system. And even within the DSO system, have an updated representation of the network, from the maintenance to the operation to the planning. So this is some of the short-term challenges that I think DSOs have to.
A lot of them, as we can see. Zenaida, you talked about reward for the response of customers, to engage customers.
Yeah.
What kind of rewards we are talking about?
So it could be access to energy at lower prices. So that's usually one of the main, or one of the incentives that customers may have. It may be that they want to have, and some customers are moved by green, let's say, behavior. That means basically contributing more to reduction of greenhouse gas emissions if they consume during certain periods of the day, when we have, for example, more renewables. It might be some kind of social incentives. It might be exchange for other services. So things like, for example, if you charge your car at certain times of the day, you get some discounts in a store where you charge. Or it might be just exchange for other types of services that customers would like to access. And it might be also having access to some kind of services which allow them to, for example, improve the level of digitalization of their own buildings, of their own houses, or even installation of certain equipment that they can have at the end user. So that might be, all of these things might be rewards that the consumers might want to access to. And of course, if you can participate in peer-to-peer markets or other, let's say, at the level of the aggregator in flexibility markets, that's also a reward that the customer may receive for shifting their own consumption.
Okay. I still have some questions, but I would leave some time for the audience. I don't know if you have any question, please. Over there, could somebody with a microphone to shout?
To have multiple, let's say, apps of protection from different vendors from different kinds of protection functions, we will need to have some standardized way of doing that. For instance, if we have a set of protections in a centralized computer and one of them crashes, probably all the features will need to be backed up by another computer. So industry and, in the end, customers, grid operators are used to have one protection and a backup at transmission level. So that's the most complex kind of systems. How do you see this being evolved to a new centralized approach, but offering the same flexibility and easiness to use as distributed systems nowadays offer? That's my question. Thank you.
I believe this question is for Clara, right?
I will try to answer because it's a difficult question, and in fact, this is a solution that comes from industry and not from the research field. So I would say that most of the development on these new architectures come from industry, and we are learning with them on how to use it and how we could leverage these to provide improved control and automation to the grid. Alberto identified really interesting challenges that are really challenges for the next steps of decentralized protection systems or even virtualized systems. We have seen RTE to propose a common platform for the development of these virtual IED systems and convincing all the providers to use that platform to do that development. This means a really big change on industry regarding the development of protection systems. And as you said, also standardization. But in the end, I really believe it's a very promising evolution for protection systems. There is still a road to go, and maybe we are not talking about a solution for tomorrow, but in some years, because it have actually evolved very, very quickly in the last 2 or 3 years. We are seeing several providers to offer this kind of solution, and so I really believe these technological challenges will be overcome in the next 4 or 5 years, and we could see a viable solution, maybe not bringing together different providers in the first generation, but in the let's say, in longer term, maybe doing that.
Okay, any more questions from the audience? There is one here. There is one here.
Hello, Berto Martins from the EDP. It's not as a question, but more like a comment. First of all, thank you for organizing this kind of event. It's very fruitful and a lot of very interesting topics to being discussed. But I have to mention that some of them already are being discussed for a long time. And from my perspective, as mentioned in the panel, so things are getting along very slowly due to 2 principal topics. Being one, the business model associated with that, because we are all aware that in the future we will be customer-centric, demand flexibility, demand response. We worked together 6 or 7 years ago in a European project that's supposed to manage local markets and flexibilities. I would ask you what has happened since that project until now. And I also have to say that more than 10 years ago in Belgium, an academic professor also said that connected the EV when arrived home at dinner, but the system did not charge because there was a smart meter there, or smart grid management there. What exists now because of that? So the business model would be, from my perspective, the first step to evolve all of that. And this goes to the question of the new ancillary services also, because people tend to think that in this new renewable framework, energy will be almost for free. And this is a myth that has to be somehow undertaken, because those ancillary services, grid resilience, grid flexibility, all of those services have to be remunerated, otherwise they will not exist and the grid will not be resilient. So the first step should be that one. And then, as the professor told in the first intervention, so the topic of cybersecurity, that personally I do start to think that it's also slightly a myth. Because my colleague from the DSO immediately told afterwards, what if the consumer did not reply as expected? Of course, if there is an adequate incentive, the consumer will respond as expected. And the demand forecast will be almost like a real-time information, because for the smart management of the system, we have to get real-time information flowing through the grids to allow the algorithms to take the decisions. So where are the TSOs in Europe flowing this real-time information to the grid? As far as I know, the Netherlands is the only one. All of the others are very much reactive, and they do not share information in real time, so this will never happen. So some of you already know me for some years. I did start my career at the TSO, then went to energy management. I work in energy markets for a long time. And I am a truly believer of energy markets, but we have to give to the system the information for this intelligence and digitalization to occur. Otherwise, in 10 years, we'll be probably here or in another amphitheater discussing the future energy or the future systems to come, and we will not evolve so much as desirable. Thank you.
Thank you, Berta, for your comments and for your compliment. As a matter of fact, this project that you mentioned that started 7 years ago, it is true, but the good things of research is that, one of the good things is that we are working for problems that will happen in 10 to 15 years. And we worked on that, and the problem didn't occur yet. One problem that we have in power systems is this very perfect system that operates 24/7 and usually doesn't bring much problems. And people tend to do not invest or do not think, people I mean from the industry side, because everything is working. As I said, Professor Passos Lopes, the light's still on. But one day, if the light goes black, we have a blackout, the things are going to be in place, and those services will be for sure on the top of the table.
Bernardo, I would like to...
Please.
Regarding this, I know that you had those projects several years ago, but more recently we just closed another project on local flexibility markets with RH, actually was the leader, where we were able to, in one hand, try to design services that are more adequate for the distribution network operator, but on the other hand is also adequate for what could be the participants in the distribution network. And there you will have low voltage consumers and medium voltage consumers or prosumers. And in the case of the low voltage consumers, we cannot expect the same behavior as we will have at the transmission level or at the high voltage level. And so we need to be comfortable with the uncertainty of their response and be able to deal with that, because it will happen. And on the other hand, we need really to provide this better information, not only for the network operators, but also for the aggregators. So aggregators need to have improved information about the grid status, what are the areas, what are the needs for the next day and for the next hours, so that they can aggregate better the resources to respond. This is one issue, and there needs to be this willingness to share some information about the status of the grid. And this we have seen in several DSOs across Europe that are doing this step. So it's one important role. On the other hand, is also be comfortable that operation will not only be done by the system operator. The DSO will have is an increased role on system operation, and this coordination is something that it will be very, very much important, and DSOs need to be comfortable with that.
That was one of my questions to Jose.
I didn't hear, sorry, but I was just going to comment two things. One is that a colleague from Madrid told me when I tell him that I was working at INESC TEC with flexibility markets, that I will retire still working on flexibility markets. And probably this is true because it's difficult, it takes time, and we are probably anticipating a situation that is not yet here. So until this really flexibility scarcity appears, the flexibility won't be paid well enough to incentivize the participation. So I think we are preparing the means for being able to do that, but it's still something that needs to come. Yeah, probably.
It's not only the blackout, but also the investment incentive, because in the end, when you just look at investment postponement, it's not a very good business model for flexibility.
Yeah, and the other comment was also that it is true that energy is cheaper, so we won't be paying for energy in the future. We will be paying for capacity, for other things, which will be cost on terms, not really the electricity price. And this is something we are seeing. Electricity prices are decreasing, but flexibility price probably will increase in the future. So there will be a trade-off between flexibility and capacity, not really energy. Yeah, totally true.
Any more questions from the audience? Okay. Jose, just one question. Regarding the market flexibility, the flexibility markets that you have studied, what do you think will be the new roles for the DSO?
We are already seeing this at the research level. I mean, DSOs have now and will have a very strong active role, very similar to TSOs, because at the end there is quite a lot of energy which is injected to the distribution grid. So there is a grid management which is going to be very different from the one that is now currently being done, and they will also have a role in the coordination process with TSO. If flexibility becomes distributed, then this flexibility needs to be made available for the DSOs and TSOs. So it will have the role of facilitating the provision of this flexibility from the distributed resources to the operation of the transmission networks.
Okay. And Zenaida, you talked about buildings here, but there are other sectors that, as a matter of fact, flexibility can exist and can be mobilized. And this can also be used perhaps for the markets and for the distribution grid. What are the other sectors that you envision?
So we have of course the industry, which tends to have I'd say a higher incentive to participate already and to interact with DSOs and the grid, simply because they basically, for the sheer consumption of energy that they have and the capacity they need, and also mobility, which will be, as it electrifies, will also of course be able to, or will need much more interaction and much more visibility than currently. We don't really worry about the transport sector, right? So it uses, well, we worry because it uses fossil fuels, but in the future this will be another user for the electrical system. But I think one of the main thing that's missing, and it's also something for the previous question, we are forgetting about the end user. So there is a lack of flow of information and data all the way to the end user. So end users are usually not that aware of the system. As I said, they are mostly as paying customers, not as active participating customers. So I think there's a lot of work still to be done there. And when we talk about digitalization, again, it has to reach end users. So they have to have a way of communicating with the rest of the system, of being aware of the rest of the system and participating in the rest of the system. So it can't just end at the level where you deliver the energy and that's it. So I think there's a big gap here, and it's a big gap for all the sectors.
Okay, so from this panel, I can see that there is a lot of challenges, there are a lot of things to be done in terms of research, which is good from one side. And I believe that we could be here talking about this all the afternoon, but we have a coffee break in a while. So I would finish. There is one more question? Oh, sorry, I'm not finishing yet.
Just one quick comment, I can speak loudly.
Just, Professor, just wait 1 second. You have a microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. We are seeing a shift in the terminology, not just for the sake of the terminology, but for the sake of how the customer is treated. We see the term consumer, and the consumer, you and I are buying things that are out there, and so they have to be presented to us, and we choose what we want to buy. And if there is a service of some sort that is offered, well, we may or may not buy it, depending how attractive that service is. And in addition, we also become suppliers. So we learn also how a utility may be a consumer. So this change of terminology has a lot of meaning in changing how the customer is treated in the future. For whatever it's worth, that's how we see things happening. So,
thank you. So, I would suggest to finish this panel, and I would like to thank you for participating here, and also the audience for the good questions that were made. So we have a coffee break now. It is, I believe, we still have 30 minutes coffee break. We're still in time. So thank you very much for supporting me in this panel. Thank you. Okay, so let's restart. The good news is that we have a sunset after this panel, but we still have, I hope, 1 hour of panel. So the second panel will be about creativity in the energy transition. And for that, we'll have young researchers. Young in Portugal is below 35 years old, by the way. Maybe, I don't know. But I think it's 35. And so they will be the ones to make a panel like the first one. But they will show how they put creativity in developing research that we believe it's important for the future and also for the present. So I will call one by one to the stage. I will start with Carla Gonçalves. She's have a PhD in applied mathematics. She was actually my first PhD student. Not only one, but was the first one to conclude. And you will see also that we have a multidisciplinary approach here. So Carla is from mathematics. Then we'll have Francisco Fernandes, currently is a PhD student on sustainable energy systems, have a background on electrical engineering here from the University of Porto. And then we'll have Carlos Silva. He's a mechanical engineer, but he's doing a PhD in energy, in sustainable energy. And he came from the industry. So he finished his degree, master's degree, some years ago. Then he tried to work in industry, and then he came back to do a PhD with us. And finally, is it difficult to pronounce? Abdelrahman El-Wash. I know it's not the correct one, but anyway, is electrical engineer. His background is electrical engineering. He's doing a PhD in sustainable energy as well, and he also tried nanotechnologies to do something. So he's also tried another area, and then he came back to work on energy. So this panel will be in the same way as the other one. I hope we have more time for questions. So it's 5 minutes presentation, by the way. Let's start with Carla. Carla is working on data markets, so that's, I think, something that Bert mentioned about data provision. If you pay for that, everyone will give you your data. I hope so. So she will talk about that.
Is it working? Okay. Yeah. Hello, good afternoon. So during the next minutes, I will try to convince you that data sharing is important in and that data markets are an efficient way to incentivize such data sharing. So as you know, there is an increasing volume of data being collected in modern societies, and this includes in power systems, where we have a huge quantity of sensors, including smart meters, collecting power consumption, power generation. We have also local weather stations and many other sensors. There is also an increasing number of work papers showing the potential of combining data. And just to give you an example of why this makes sense, if I am a wind farm, and my colleagues are also wind farms, and the wind goes mainly in this direction, if I have a forecast that tells me that today I have no wind, then I believe that my power production will be zero. But if I suddenly have an increase in power production and I am producing a lot, I can tell them that the wind is coming and they can benefit with this data sharing. So until here, it seems perfect. We have a huge quantity of data being collected. We know that the combination of this data can improve our forecasting models, but we have a problem. The data is usually collected by different companies or individuals that compete. The companies can compete in the same electricity market, so they will be unwilling to share their data unless there are incentives for data sharing. And here is where we start using our creativity for agents to do this data sharing. It is fundamental that we ensure data privacy, but it might not be enough, because in this case, I will help them to improve their forecasts by telling them the wind is coming, but I don't have a benefit. So even if my data is private, what is my benefit? So we believe data markets are an efficient way, an effective way to incentivize this data sharing. So it's all about creating compensation according to the data that agents are providing. We have two different ways to incentivize this data sharing. One of them is the monetary way. So we assume that data owners are willing to share their data because they will receive some monetary compensation that relates to the impact of their data when improving the models of the others, the data buyers. So basically we have data buyers that are able to pay to get best forecasts or better data, and we have the data sellers that are willing to share because they will receive a monetary compensation. And then usually we assume in the middle a market operator to collect all the information, does the collaborative analytics, assess the value, the payments, etc. Another way to incentive this data sharing is through non-monetary incentives like equitable data exchange, where I'm willing to share my data because I know that the market operator will assess the value of my data and will try to locate data from the others that has similar value. So we are exchanging data with similar value. Of course, there are other ways to incentivize data sharing that are not here, like services. So this is what Google does with us when we provide our opinions about the restaurants, etc. So we give our data because we receive a service in return. How can we apply, for example, this data monetization in the power systems, in the energy sector? So we can, for instance, improve the load forecast. So the transmission system operator has to balance production and consumption, otherwise we will have a blackout. And as you know, renewable energy depends on the weather, but load forecast also has this dependence on the weather and also our behavior. So it is really important for the transmission system operator to improve these forecasts. And a possibility would be to monetize a random sample, let's say, of the Portuguese population. So we would sell data from our sensors at our homes. So the transmission system operator could pay it because he would reduce the costs, the operational costs, because he has better forecasts, so less costs. And this would be a good incentive for us, population, to share the data with the transmission system operator. And for now, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Respect the 5 minutes. So now we'll have Francisco Fernandes, is working on symbolic AI and how to integrate symbolic AI in the operation of electrical networks, in this case on control.
Okay, so thank you very much for the presentation. So today I'm going to talk about how we can leverage the large amounts of data that are now flooding control rooms to help the operator in its increasingly harder decision-making process. So what I got right here is an operator support bot. The idea is very simple. It's a bot that can help the operator in some of the tasks that are required in the day-to-day life of control rooms. Today I'm showing a simple interaction. Today I'm showing a simple interaction where the operator asks the bot for a model to address the security classification task. More specifically, he asks for an interpretable model. Why an interpretable model? Because security classification is a task of high risk. It's a task where you classify a state as safe or secure and unsecure. And if you have a false negative classification, you may be misinterpreting a blackout or a loss of flow. And this is something, so it's normal that the operator demands for a model whose functioning and validation is easy to do. Something that is not straightforward in typical AI models, things like neural networks. So based on this, the bot does something very important. He asks about prior knowledge of the system. This is very important because this is knowledge that the operator has gained through years of experience in a power system that can be used to enrich the model. Okay? Not only does this increase the performance of the model, but also introduces the concept of cooperative learning. This is introducing the operator in the loop of learning. And this increases confidence and tends to reduce the algorithm aversion to AI. In this case, the operator provides a very common relation between inertia and security, and this is the starting point. The bot then uses this human knowledge with some data and creates a primitive version of the model we require. Once again, cooperation is introduced, as validation is required from the operator. Note that this is only possible because the model is interpretable, it's easy to understand, it's a bunch of rules. If everything is all right, if the operator validates this, then a framework that we created to develop models like this will be used to transform that model into something with a better performance, but that is still fully interpretable, reaching a final version of the model. This method right here, that method right there that transforms the models and that can generate transparent pieces of knowledge, such as statements or rules, is the heart of the creative idea that I want to show you today. So how does it work? As you understood before, the first step is the definition of a primitive version of the model, a first version of the model, as well as the limits for its evolution. Let's call it evolution frame or a template, something that defines how large or how small the model can get. Why is this important? Because large models tend to be very hard to understand, and sometimes models that are very simple cannot perform the task at hand. After we have this model, then we need something that can sequentially transform this, so new forms of the model are generated until a near optimal form is reached. We call this a motor of evolution. In this case, what we did, we used a change simulated annealing, which is a very common heuristic that was transformed to be able to deal with symbolic models. Once we have a model and something that can transform this model into a newer version, then we just need something that gives us feedback on the quality of these models, so we know which one to choose in the next iteration of evolution. This can be a label data set, where we can measure the performance of our model in a label data set and learn in a supervised way. This would be, for instance, a data set with the power system conditions and the true security or not of that state. Or it can also be a simulation environment, something where a sequence of actions performed by the model can be rewarded depending on its ability to perform the task at hand. In the case of the power system, it could be a digital twin, a detailed power system model, or some simulation environments that will be faster. this idea that combines digital twins, data, AI, and human knowledge is the idea that I wanted to show you today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Now, Carlos Silva will talk about dynamic incentives for electrical mobility, so how we can incentivize people to change their behavior to for example, use local generation. I'm trying to use my time when he puts back the micro. But this is related with the presentation of Mladen about behavioral economics, so it's strongly related how you change the behavior, in this case of EV drivers.
Is it working?
No, you can. Okay. It works when you start talking.
No, but the microphone.
Now it's working.
Okay, perfect. So my presentation is on dynamic incentives for green electrical mobility. So we have seen a lot of advances in different sectors recently. So in the mobility sector, we have this push and adoption of electric mobility, hydrogen, because we are concerned on the sector emissions, and there's also a push for electrification. On the energy sector, there's a lot of renewable energy systems being installed, but also electrical energy storage. From the service side, a push also for managing the energy consumption, but also increasing the convenience for consumers and starting to bundle different services as one. And all of these sectors generate a lot of data, and so we can try to use computational intelligence techniques to extract value and try to create new data-driven services. One example of a data-driven service is dynamic pricing. So it's instead of having just one fixed tariff, you have different tariffs during the day. And so what we've created within the Interconnect project, and also in collaboration with Sonai and Elergon, is a dynamic incentive service for EV charging stations. So basically, the Continent stores have associated EV charging stations, and currently the EV users have access to incentives so that they go at specific periods of the day to charge because it's more beneficial to a certain goal. And the way they perceive this as discounts on their usual charging tariff, and they accumulate the savings on their store loyalty card. So this is the basic pipeline of the system. We are acquiring data from a charging station management system daily. We are also gathering external data like market prices and numerical weather predictions, and we are using this as inputs for in a forecasting pipeline that gives us a day-ahead occupancy predictions of the charging station, but also of the renewable energy generation that is expected. All of this information is input of an optimization problem that gives us what are the right incentives and in what hours for the consumers. And then we have to communicate those incentives to the consumers, and we are doing this with a usual mobile app that they already use for charging, but with updated features, and they receive notifications with the best incentives that are available. So what we expect from these incentives is that they use the discounts available and change their behavior. And if they change their behavior, they also change indirectly the electrical load of, in this case, the supermarket store. So here is an example of how the plug and charge application from Continent is working. I don't think this is starting from the right place. I think I can go back. Yeah, okay. So basically we have, for example, a 5% discount at 3 p.m. for this day. We can also check the historical notifications from the application. So these are historical discounts that were available. And finally, there's also a dedicated menu where the consumers can check for every store what are the discounts available for today and for tomorrow. And in this case, in this pilot project that we developed, that there's 3 stores that are already available with this kind of service. But why is this important? Why are we studying this? From a research perspective, this is very interesting because when we are dealing with incentives and changes in price for consumers, we are actually trying to determine what is their price elasticity of demand. And price elasticity, so elasticity is a part of a very complex causal system because there's a lot of variables that determine not only the prices, but also the demand. And so you have to resort to causality and causal models as a way to control or remove the effect of these variables so that you keep only this relationship between price and demand and you extract the elasticity knowledge. And elasticity is very important to characterize consumers. And you can even try to answer questions which are called counterfactuals, like what-if questions. So instead of providing a 25% incentive this hour, what would happen if I just provide 20 or 15%? So this is very important and very important also from the business logic. So if we know the elasticity values, you can then optimize in different ways. We can tailor incentive schemes or pricing schemes for individual or clusters of consumers. We can try to integrate more renewable energy using these incentives, but also try to see EV charging stations as providers of flexibility and participating in markets. Another topic is also carbon emissions. So if you think about how EV charging stations consume a lot of electricity and the public grid has an associated carbon intensity, then it means that there's an indirect contribution in terms of carbon emissions. So one thing that we can do is try to optimize for those emissions. And for that, we need, for example, day-ahead forecasts of the load, of the renewable energy generation in the local system, but also what is the grid carbon intensity for tomorrow. And this can have a lot of uncertainty in terms of forecasting, so it can create hundreds or thousands of scenarios and build stochastic optimization problems, and each you are optimizing for the whole set of scenarios. So you are taking decisions on prices, and if you know, and this is a crucial part, if you know elasticity, you can price influences the demand, and so you are also changing indirectly the carbon emissions of the system. And also in that optimization problem, you can, according to a certain risk profile of the company or the charging station operator, also have flexibility in terms of risk. So you can think about, you can fulfill a daily budget of emissions, for example, for 90% of the scenarios, and then you can have 10% in which you can relax and do not obey that kind of daily budget. So overall, and the final note is this: consumer characterization is crucial, elasticity is very important. We can develop new data-driven services, but we can also support the ongoing transition, energy transition that we are facing. And thank you.
Okay, and now finally, Abdul will talk about power electronics and green hydrogen.
Thank you, Ricardo. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Abdurrahman Hawash, Abdu, as Ricardo said, as everyone knowing. Today, the title of my presentation is Power Electronics and Green Hydrogen. And I would like to start, since this is the last presentation of today, using what we have been discussing today in terms of how to look into this issue, in the sense of we have a risk that in the future, we are going to have much more renewables, decreased inertia, the need of new ancillary services, the nature of our power system is going to change, and accordingly, new equipment and loads are going to be connected. One of them is green hydrogens, and the green hydrogen are a DC load, and this needs a power electronics interface. And this power electronics interface is also having its own challenges, and it's all on, how can I say, the characteristics that are different from what we want from it in terms of, for example, grid services. When it comes to green hydrogen, what grid services we are looking into, for example, we can look into something like the balancing service, which is just achieving the balance between load and demand to keep our frequency within the safe limits, or something like voltage right-through capabilities. In this picture to the right is like the low voltage right-through capability. When a short circuit happens, by the grid code, the loads should be connected for a certain amount of times. But what does this mean is in relation to green hydrogen electrolyzers is that grid codes nowadays are mainly for generators. Hydrogen electrolyzers are loads, and we need to ask many things. First, one of most important, can they actually do it? Can they actually do it on the minimum scale and also on large scale over a full power system? If we look, for example, at the electrical transmission system in Portugal, just as a representation to show the complexity of it, the electrical systems are big. We are just here looking at something like the transmission system. If we want to deploy many hydrogen electrolyzers, we mean that at each point of interest of having an electrolyzer project, we'll have a semi-system more or less like this. We have electrical grid, hydrogen electrolyzers, then the hydrogen either pumped into the gas grid or stored. And our focus now is to answer this question. This is the work we are conducting in our research, is how can we connect the hydrogen electrolyzers to the electrical grid to enable it to be flexible in the electrical grid and provide great services. To look into it on a more zoomed in approach and relating the power electronics, we'll have something in general similar like this at each bus. The grid and its required measurements, transformers, a power electronics interface, then the electrolyzers, that's in terms of power. In control, we have our electrolyzer control, controlling its power in terms of voltage and current. Then we add another level of control of grid support, whatever signals the grid needs, pass it to the electrolyzer control, and then actually controlling the electrolyzer. But why we say this is a challenge? First, we need to understand the hydrogen electrolyzers. In general, their models are complex, and there is a lot of research from the electrochemical point of view, where the models of electrolyzer and their operation and behavior changes depending on temperature, pressure, how they look like, what are the chemical solutions inside of them, and all of other constants affect the operating point. And when the operating point changes, depending on different parameters, for the power electronics perspective, we have problems in terms of, that means that the behavior of the electrolyzer changes at every operation point. It can be sensitive. In this case, electrolyzers are very sensitive to current. This means that typical controllers we use in the power system and power converters cannot be used anymore. And also typical power electronics interfaces, diodes and thyristors, simply cannot also provide the grid services we need in terms of flexibility. And I know it has been the key word of the speeches today, but yes, it's adaptivity. And we follow that in having adaptive controllers and adaptive power converters in terms of switching from, for example, diode and thyristors to transistors, and also active controllers, where those controllers can have some adaptive gains, parameters that can change depending on the operating point, which have the objective of always having the same the same behavior at any operating point, keeping in mind that we need this to be implemented in real life, so we need it to be implemented using math blocks or simple blocks to be compatible with any controller type or any control environment to be used. This is mainly the research we have been conducted, and just to show you one last slide of the complexity of it and trying to move from that even that bus system that we showed even gets more, where again we have the grid with 1 to 4 power electronics stages to convert and analyze the voltages and current needs and provide the adaptivity we need. And the work we are actually working on now is to implement this system in hardware, where in our laboratory we already have our first electrolyzer to start testing this from simulation to actual real life work, while also working on building our own converters, which are not commonly found in the market or the other technologies normally used to power up electrolyzers. This is what I had to present for now, and later we can discuss any other questions. Thank you.
Okay, so time for questions. We have a lot of time now for questions. So they are a little bit nervous, by the way. I will try to put them more nervous. Okay, Carlo, just, you are from mathematics. This panel is about creativity. So how creativity is important for you as a researcher, and you made your PhD on this area, how you bring mathematics and statistics, which somehow are fundamental disciplines, to energy use cases.
Thank you for the question. So in applied mathematics, we have many different fields, and the examples are optimization, numerical analysis, and also probability and statistics. And as in pure mathematics, we also have these complex theorems, proofs, and although they seem like an encrypted language, they were designed to solve real-world problems. And the creativity brings these concepts, these very complex concepts, to the energy and the process starts with the problem identification, how we formulate the problem, how we do it in a way that we have an optimizer, an efficient optimizer, with certain certain conditions and guarantees that we will have convergence, optimal global solution or local, etc. And I can probably give an example. So we have a meeting. We had a meeting with an European project partner that asked us to design a data market, a monetization data market, where sellers would just be the price that they want to sell a feature, and buyers would just also fix the price they want to pay for a point forecast. And this was their specification. Then we had to think about the problem in energy sector. One of the biggest challenges we have is about load forecasting, renewable energy forecasting. So we are talking about regression problems. So it all ends up with a mathematical problem that is basically find the best forecasting model that minimizes an error subject to these constraints on prices. And we had to use some creativity to do this formulation and then have a way to solve it, because it is a mix between continuous variables that are the coefficients of the models, the binary variables that are the decision of taking the feature or not, depending on the price of the feature. And
Okay, let me be provocative. To be provocative, so we are seeing a lot of open data. So nowadays, we have, for example, in power systems, and so is making data open. We can see now what wind farm is producing. This data is publicly available, but you are working on data monetization. So how you see your work in terms of data monetization and exchange in an era where open data is becoming much more available for free?
It is available sometimes in an aggregated level, and if we have it disaggregated, we have more powerful insight to our models. There is also this problem of sometimes it's not really up-to-date data. It's not being, because sometimes we need to do forecasts 1 hour ahead, so it would be very useful to have the power measurements right now. And in these public data sets, sometimes the data has like 2 days of delay, 1 week, it depends.
So granularity and availability of data in real time, those are the key points for data monetization. Okay, Francisco, you show this symbolic AI approach. How you see this process? So if you have in front of you an operator in a control room, how you can co-create with him, first convince him that what you are doing is relevant, and then how you can improve and collaborate with him using what you are doing here in terms of this chatbot that you show with somehow an interaction with a human operator. How you see the process and the benefits of it?
Yeah, I think the human can enter the loop in multiple ways. But so the first would be defining a first version of the models, etc. Validation is always important. But nowadays that the system is constantly changing, so one of the problems I would say with AI nowadays in this type of applications would be that the grid is changing because we have reinforcements to the grid, new types of generators entering every day. So you have to constantly change the model, readapt. And sometimes it can be useful if you have an interpretable model, a very good interpretable model, that this information can be directly inserted by the operator, for instance, without the need of a lot of retraining. This is a place for the operator to enter in, and in this particular place it's very, very useful to constantly update the model, for instance.
Okay, so one comment we normally hear is that, okay, you allow the human to include his knowledge and you use the human knowledge and you combine it with data, but they tell us, not to you, they told it to me, okay, but if the human is integrated and you are building the model around the human knowledge, you are somehow being constrained by the knowledge of the human itself. So if it is a human that is not very experienced, you have this problem. So The question here is where we see the value of the human here in this approach.
I think if you have, of course, you won't let anyone cooperate with your model if you don't have like enough power system experience. So here you are supposed to have an expert, so someone that has operated. But I would say that a good algorithm can mutate the model enough to get out of these local optimum points that the operator put the model in, so it could get out, and that has as much to do with how you design the method, how we mutate the model, how we can search through the search space of models to in fact go to a place where it's actually behavior near optimal, I would say.
So by doing that, we are making possible co-learning. So human learns with the model and vice versa, and that is, I think, an important added value.
I would also add that even if we're gonna go later to models where the cooperation of the human is not there, I think in this step where we see that operators are very risk adverse, it's a good step, like a transition step, to go to those models. Because in this way, effectively, the operator is seeing and watching what's the performance of the model, what did he try to do, so we try to tweak the model to introduce rules that he used, okay? So he already knows that that model had a certain behavior, and something better came out of a model that it's not as interpretable, but at least he got the experience of trying to create that model, for instance. I think that is also important. But what I see is that even these types of models, that it's frequent for in the industry that you have like these types of expert systems, little rule-based models, that the industry still wants it because of it can explain certain behaviors that other models can. So I think there's place for it.
Okay, I told them they were nervous, and I'm putting them more nervous because I'm not following the script of questions we have here. Carlos, we are hearing a lot of dynamic tariffs for many years. So everyone was talking, I think 10 years ago, 15 years ago, for example, when I started my PhD, everyone was already talking on that. What you presented, how you put creativity in making something that is different from what already exists, and now you can leverage that to create tariffs that can actually change the behavior of consumers.
So first of all, I think I already found literature for at least 25 years related to dynamic pricing and elasticity in power systems specifically. So it's interesting that it's not quite used in our context, in practical application. And it's also interesting to discuss why. In terms of creativity, what we see that it's lacking, it's data, for one. So data on electric mobility overall, but specifically on how EV drivers react to incentives and how willing they are to receive those signals, which can be incentives, can be different prices, there are different combinations. So one way to have creativity in the process is the development of pilot projects. So this came from a research project, and it's very good that we have space to develop these pilot projects and also with collaborations with industry partners, because it allows us to have access to real consumers, real data coming in from their behavior. There's also creativity on how to design such a pilot project, because a priori we have no knowledge on their elasticity, so we cannot just randomly generate the incentives. We have to have some reasoning behind it, but it's challenging, and there are also some challenges and creativity process on how to design that methodology. And finally, I think there's also a creative process in the end when you have the data coming in and you have to know how to approach it. In this case, we do not observe elasticity, we observe prices, we observe consumption. So we need tools like causality, and I think that's the key point here, because causality is not very used in energy systems. There's not a lot of examples. So that's the key tool that allows us to then extract more knowledge from this type of services. And having space in a pilot project to produce such results, I think it's very good.
Okay, now a very tricky question. You had an experience in industry. So imagine that you are doing this outside the environment of R&D institution. What kind of advantages or disadvantages you see on that? My question is, you are reading now a book on causality, for example. I don't know if you finish or not, but how an environment like the one you have here on university, a research institution, can make you doing things that are disruptive, let's say, and relevant at the same time to industry.
Okay, for once, I think those kinds of partnerships are what makes this type of research thrive. So in our case, I think for example, from a research perspective, we can help industry partners on generating algorithms to provide incentives, but also think about techniques then to analyze the data. And that's when causality comes in. And that's also an interesting topic, is how can we then present results from such an assessment to partners that maybe are not so into the algorithms and that part. So for example, having compact representations of what is elasticity and being very simple in trying to explain what is, and also touching a little bit on Francisco's work on how to interpret pricing decisions, for example, can also be very interesting. But on that edge between research and industry, I think what he did here is to prove that something is technologically realizable. And so I think that's also very interesting. So from an industry perspective, there's a few adjustments on a mobile application, and just data coming in a different way allows us to create a whole new data-driven service for consumers. And from a research perspective, we have data now being generated from that pilot project, and we can apply a whole set of new techniques to estimate new things, and then even optimize again the system and learn continuously the elasticities and continue to see how the behavior changes with the mechanism.
Thank you. Abdul, we hear sometimes that, okay, this hardware will be manufactured in Asia, so how Europe can be competitive in semiconductors industry, in power electronics. Is hydrogen and what you are doing some kind of a niche that European industry can explore to make solutions that are competitive in the market?
I would say yes and no in the same time, because it's more about utilizing other semiconductors typically not used within this research area, because hydrogen electrolyzers are used since the 60s and have been on since then, but just for production. The new part, that's why they were using diodes, uncontrolled power electronics one, just I need X power, this way you will get X power. But now what we are asking from the electrolyzer is actually different. So in terms of power electronics, it should be different as well, in the sense of, okay, everyone was using diodes, thyristors, now we need to move something like transistors. So to what extent the semiconductors industry in transistors need to adapt to hydrogen electrolyzers, we need to first know what will the ones existing now do. And this is a question that wasn't answered for now, because most of the operation scenarios for electrolyzers wasn't like that. So this is kind of, then that's why I said yes and no at the same time. So we don't know yet if we need, how much more we will need from semiconductors industry, but we know that we already didn't utilize everything we have in the power electronics circuitry existing since the 70s and 80s as well, in terms of transistors-based solutions, for example. Because that controllability was not used at all. That power, I would say, to control. And then we can see, do we need more from semiconductors? Do we need more from hydrogen electrolyzers themselves? There's already a big debate, alkaline or PEM. There is also speaking about research development in AEM, different types even of electrolyzers. And each of them can require different types of semiconductors, because also we're speaking different ranges of currents, because electrolyzers are high current densities. That's why people use diodes and thyristors. But now transistors are mature enough that they can carry some of these currents. So, you know, it's kind of a lot of like a puzzle, and seeing now, will the transistor actually do the jobs? Is enough or not? and how much more we need from that.
So what can we do that is, or you think that will be done in the next years that can be disruptive on this area? I mean,
in terms of
controllability?
Semiconductors, I wouldn't say as fast as more in the hydrogen electrolyzers industry itself, which is something very far from me, being an electrical engineer. But actually, the electrochemical engineer and manufacturer of electrolyzers and the research done there is what can be in the short term something very decisive, mainly in the terms of response speed of electrolyzers. Because looking at it from electrical point of view, we need that when something in the grid happens, I want it to respond fast. So alkaline electrolyzers respond in a certain speed, PEM are different. Then the research now is AEM, the anion exchange membrane electrolyzers, which can be faster. So we're speaking going from 10 seconds from 0 to 100. And now it's 1 second in PEM. AEM can go sub 1 second period of time. So this I would say near. And this, of course, can affect the power electronics work because for example, in the work that I'm doing something normally not done in power electronics, which is I want to slow my electrical system a little bit to match the speed of the electrolyzer. So that way, in order to create adaptive controllers, I need to follow certain path and certain line of thoughts. But when you change that to a faster electrolyzer, this automatically forces you to adapt a different path in how would you design your control, your power converters. It affects many things. Also to the power quality that will result from that power interface. So yeah, semiconductors not as fast as the electrolyzers. And that also explains a lot how, in this case, this work might seem very electrical power engineering one, but the interdisciplinary cooperation from chemical engineers, electrochemicals, power systems experts, many other disciplines have an effect on actually how this power electronics work would result. And I'm not even mentioning economical aspects. I'm just asking a simple question: does this work or not, research-wise? Can it do it? Then we can see how we can optimize it. But we are still at that stage in the integration of hydrogen electrolyzers that first let's see if it works or not. So.
Thank you. So we have time for questions from the audience. Please, questions. No questions. They are too shy. I have to take my questions now from here. No questions. Okay, one question.
Okay, so taking back the words from Carlos about the creativity, about the charging, the question is how easy it is to convince a company like Elergon, or Sonai for that matter, of the advantages and even explaining it on simple terms, how it could be, how easy it is to convince them. It had to be easy, so the disclaimer already, because the service is running. But it's important to understand within this creativity how easy it is to convince companies to invest in science, because it's ultimately what we are selling here.
So specifically for my topic, first of all, it's proving that it's technologically realizable, which is also something that is the main question in the literature, if dynamic pricing overall is realizable or not. And I think we have convinced that it is possible, and it's not a pure dynamic pricing scheme, it's only incentives through discount and coupons, etc. But that's already something. And the other level will be convincing them that works towards a certain goal. That's a whole other issue. So that's ongoing work. So looking at results, that's why we are using this kind of method, looking at results, looking at how price sensitive consumers are. And if they are, then we can optimize the system towards a certain goal. It can be emissions, it can be costs, it can be profits, and so on. So the first step, I think, it was already taken. The second one, I think it's ongoing work and it's too preliminary to convince, because there's a lot of conflicting results for demand response, if it works or not, what kind of demand response, what flexibility to address in consumers, what pricing schemes to adopt, real-time pricing, day ahead, etc. So it's not a closed research question. There are a lot of them. We can think about if we are adjusting the hour at which they go to charge, if we are trying to adjust the amount of electricity they use, the duration of the charging. So there are a lot of open questions, and to have a final product that we say it works, very hard to answer right now.
Any more questions? One there.
I have a question to Carlos regarding the. So you have applied this work specifically for the case of Alargon and Continent, but in fact, this is really a very important topic that could be replicable to other use cases with electrical vehicles or even with, I don't know, maybe self-consumption or something like that. Could this approach that you develop be applicable to other use cases where you want to incentivize the participation of consumers?
I do think so. So most of the work being done with elasticity is for households and residential consumers. So it's already being applied there as a research topic. For EVs is also a research topic, but with less amount of work. So I think so. The rest of the question was?
No, in case of the electrical vehicle management, could it be applied to other installations where you want to manage?
So I think we developed the system in a quite agnostic way. So we have a certain type of input that we need, which is basically historical charging session data. And we have an output, which are the incentives and at which hours. This is quite agnostic of if we are working with a specific charging station or charging station management system. So I do think this is applicable to other settings very easily. For example, even for the public charging network, it could be a possibility. I don't know if legally it's possible, but at least technologically, I don't see many barriers or obstacles.
Guys, thank you for the presentations. Carla, maybe this one directed to you. If data sharing is to be extended to all consumers and to all available parties, so I'm thinking of residential household consumers. And if we want to ensure close to real-time communication and the necessary data quality and reliability of this data provision, this, I'm sure that means some hardware that comes along with it, or some software that can enable this environment. Don't you think that any investment on this topic would offset the very incentives that could be provided for data sharing? How do you feel about this?
I think it should not be an expensive hardware, something like, I don't know, a Raspberry Pi would be enough. Of course, we, in that case, would have to design our models to be sure that we don't have high quantities of data to share. So we would need something more online. We have more communication, but less information being transmitted each time. But I don't think in terms of hardware, it would be a big problem. I'm not an expert in hardware.
No, I was thinking about the smart meter is not enough. So if we have a dongle connected to it, or a connector being hosted in a Raspberry Pi, or a piece of software that enables all of this, if the cost would not offset it, but so I'm not sure. Not sure.
We have to look at the ships industry. They are decreasing the cost a lot, even the cost of telecommunications nowadays. So we use our smartwatch and we can do anything we can do with a normal phone, and you don't pay more than that, for example. And the same will happen with hardware in the future. So the cost is becoming so low that I don't think it will be an issue. I think with data, the main issue is privacy. That's the point. And you are selling privacy. And the key question is not so much about the cost of acquiring data or storing data, it's more the cost you give for your own privacy, the privacy of your data, which we don't give it too much, to be honest, because we use Google Maps and we are giving data to Google and they know where we are and so on. So the value we are giving to privacy is low. But if you start to have problems in the future, like we have with the Cambridge Analytics, so your own data is being used for Donald Trump to be president of the United States, you start to become a little bit concerned. You put more cost on the privacy, not so much, I think, on the hardware.
Thanks.
More questions?
Just another thing. For the use case that you presented, I'm sorry, a bioagreement suffice? Do we need the data market for the wind case that you
For the wind case, where we would cooperate with each other to
yeah,
send the data?
if they know exactly who are the entities that would profit from this exchange, maybe an agreement would be sufficient, no?
So in our mechanism, so there is this central operator, the market operator, and we send data to him. And when we buy forecasts, we have better forecasts, but we don't know whose data was used to produce that forecast. So I don't know who is contributing to this forecast. I don't know if this was the question.
Yeah, because the market,
and they don't know, so they receive money, but they don't know who they are helping. So they know that they are useful for some model to help the predictability of some wind farm, but they don't know where it is and who is the...
Okay, so the number of participants and the volume would justify a market.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Abdul, you have in your first slides one good research question, which is, what if the load cannot comply with the grid code?
What if the load?
The load cannot comply with the grid code. So my question is, considering the amount and the plans of hydrogen that we have for Portugal, what would be the impact of a non-compliance in a country such as Portugal?
Okay, if you're speaking about the hydrogen electrolyzer industry in general, maybe there is a little bit part missed in that question that I wrote there. It's how fast can they do it? Because at the end of the day, it's a load. And you can just tell it go from 100% production to 50%, okay? Depending on how fast you can do it, we can categorize it in a certain grid service. The other part, then we can look at it like if it gets that signal and it doesn't comply, that's what we can then negotiate if it doesn't comply in that sense, because it can do it, but fast or slow. That's guaranteed in that sense. In the other case, the implications will mainly be on the power system, basically, that then this affects the power system stability, resilience, for example, as we saw in the presentation of Professor Pestalozzi, that how then at the year, the frequency, the rock-off of the in a power disturbance, for example, can be affected depending on the inertia in the system, because in this way, we can look at green and hydrogen electrolyzers as if they are providing some kind of a synthetic inertia in a way, but we have just to convert the concept of how we look at it, that a load, when there is a power problem, we don't ask it to provide more power, we just ask it to reduce the power. And we just see that have power and the equivalent energy a long time, so we have our kind of synthetic inertia. So that will be the effect. Somehow or another, I'm not saying it is, it can be considered somehow providing some kind of this support. So the effect will directly be reflected to the power system. It will just be as a problem happened and we disconnected the electrolyzers. So we lost basically a resource. So in other simple terms, it will just make the situation worse in that case. That would be the effect of it not doing it. The idea if it's a research question, can it do it or not? Yes, the question, but the main question is how fast. That's the main differentiating thing between even choosing certain hydrogen electrolyzer technology over the other. It's mainly the speed when we look at it from a future electrical power system stability and resilience perspective. Hope that answered the question.
Okay, we have time for one question. Only if it is for Francisco. Is for Francisco? No. Okay, but we can take one more.
Can I?
Yeah.
Okay. This question is for Abdul. So there is one thing that you have not addressed, that is those converters, and knowing that an electrolyzer, namely a big one, will be a modular solution, right? So you will have, in fact, several modules of small electrolyzers where you have to control each one, and on top of that, most probably you will have to have a master control. Exactly. So do you think that, for instance, in terms of provision of frequency balancing services, is this approach too complex, or how can this affect the response, the global response of the electrolyzer that we want to be as fast as possible in terms of the control?
Yep, yeah, this is a very interesting one, because actually this will open a new research area in the terms of control, because this is equivalent to like a lot of research that's done, for example, in provisionals of services from wind turbines. And if we have several wind farms, if we coordinate the responses, like with some delays or some time delays, we can actually make the rock-off, for example, have effect on the rock-off and nadir. So we can think of it the same way in hydrogen electrolyzers, in that sense that it's, for example, 100 megawatt and it's consisted of 10 megawatts. And each one of those coordinating the control approaches, yes, it's doable, because if it's a modular, these controllers that we have developed now, it basically adaptive in the sense that it sees what is the parameters, the model of the electrolyzer, and electrolyzers can be divided in the modular. So each modular can have its own model and can have its own controller. So in this idea, yeah, we will have separate controllers, local controllers, and then a coordinating control that can just controls the triggering approach. And this opens a lot of possibilities and effect on the power systems. So yes, for sure, this will have an effect. From what similar research done in other fields, it should be a positive effect. We're not sure yet, because this is not tried yet, because at the moment, the work now is first making it for one controller, one unit, one module, and then, okay, now we can do that. That's why even the work at the end that I showed was for the circuit. But yeah, the idea is to take that and put it all within a power hardware in the loop to test in a grid. And if we have multiples of that, and parallel, and time delays, so this for sure will give us the opportunity to test such an approach of coordinating control from green hydrogen electrolyzers.
Thank you.
Yeah. To close, if there is no more questions, one question to Francisco to close. So in what you presented, for a quick answer, by the way,
for a quick answer,
what other use cases and applications you see in control rooms, but also outside control rooms, to symbolic AI that you present?
So I think everything that is close to an expert system, in principle, it's rule-based, so you can insert this type of methodologies. So inside of control rooms would be this. Also, there are some problems that are so hard that, or so large, that these types of methods don't really fit into it and are not really needed, like forecast, for instance. I see no purpose in introducing these types of things. Outside, as Carlos said, also explaining prices, even, for instance, I like control design can also be a methodology similar to this can be used for control design, even protections maybe. Yeah, things that are still expert systems or are things very similar to expert systems, I would say.
Okay, thank you. So let's thank the speakers and the panel. Okay, so to close the event, I call Professor João Claro, Chairman and CEO of INESC TEC.
Yes, they are working. Okay, so good afternoon. This has been an exceptional afternoon. It's been a really extremely high quality event until now. From now on, I'm sure that the quality is going to drop seriously because I have been asked to do something that is impossible, and that's to close the event with a summary and some conclusions that could be at the level of the previous discussions and presentations that we have had. So I cannot promise that, I will not deliver that, but I will do my best. And especially I will do my best in transitioning us smoothly and soon to the pleasant sunset that we will have at the end of the event. But first and foremost, I would like to join the organizers in thanking everyone who was able to join us today, who took the time to join us today. The purpose of this event is impossible to achieve without your participation. Making this an impactful event, and that's our aim, can only happen if we have good, strong attendance and good and strong participation, as we have had, I'm sure, that was clearly present in the questions that were addressed to the panels. On behalf of the audience and on behalf of the broader INESC TEC community, I would like to express our deepest gratitude to the organizing team of the event, to Ricardo, to Manuel Matos, David, who are the coordination team of our Center for Power and Energy Systems, to all the leadership of the center, to the team that was involved in organizing the event, which had impeccable logistics, which had impeccable graphical support, as we have seen. So congratulations and thank you to all of you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you to all the panel members, also to Bernardo, who chaired the first panel, and Ricardo, obviously, for chairing overall the event, and also the second panel. Okay, so a very broad comment. As an initial point, I would like to frame the event in something that is very important in the European context nowadays. As you know, we have as a priority for the current framework program, climate transition, digital transitions. The twin transitions are very important. But actually seeing how the twin transitions, and specifically those that bring climate, energy, and digital transitions together, how they are happening on the ground, this has not been so easy to see and to discuss and to discern. We have had high-level policy discussions about the importance of these transitions, the synergies between them, but seeing how they are actually taking place on the ground, that has been a bit scarcer to see and rarer to see. And I think that the event that we had today had actually plenty of clear contributions along this line, with very important ideas on what these synergies are, what are the main challenges in combining innovations in these two areas, what are the trade-offs, and also what are the types of partnerships and public policy support that can best leverage these synergies. So This is, I think, a very important contribution that took place here this afternoon for a very important discussion that we are having at the European level, and that's how this twin transition is actually taking place on the ground with twin innovations, if you want. What is making this successful? What are the requirements for us to scale these innovations into the successful twin transition as well? So, as a brief summary, we started the event with a keynote by Professor Kezunovic, and his keynote was very, very clear. The topic was the risks and the importance of risk management in massive electrification that we see ahead in the future. So he outlined very clearly the motivations for this massive electrification and the resulting risks that he sees and we see across multiple critical infrastructures. So he explored a number of areas of risk, and then he outlined what he considers to be some precursors of the risk management that is required. He outlined three major categories: capital investment, regulatory action, and then decision-making and control. And he went to focus within this category on the specific topic of prediction and prediction of outages in particular. So he outlined then at this level of detail what are key building blocks that are required and that will enable this successful prediction of outages. And he went on to provide a more forward-looking perspective on how this can be achieved using advanced combinations of data modeling, of physical modeling, and automation globally, jointly also with considering specific objectives for risk mitigation, bridging, planning, and preparation to communication and to mitigation. So overall, in his keynote, he made clear how central the electric grid is going to become to any country's economic and societal development. And I would say that in open economies such as Portugal, we will see the importance of the electric grid emerging in places where we will traditionally not look for it. I would say that, for instance, as the country is making itself increasingly attractive for foreign investment, the robustness, the quality, the resilience of our electric grid is going to become increasingly important and critical asset. Achieving this requires the kind of tools and the kind of approaches that he brought us in his presentation, and which have also been a key thrust for our work at INESC TEC. So plenty of the work that we have been doing in supply security assessment, in studying grid expansions for major developments such as, for instance, offshore renewable energy developments, or large-scale European pilots that we have been conducting, testing issues such as active demand. They are all components of work that we have been doing at INESC TEC in this area. Then the first panel brought us a holistic vision for power system decarbonization. Integration of renewable energy sources in particular is vital for this decarbonization. And so we had 4 interventions here highlighting different aspects of the challenges and the solutions for maintaining power system resilience within this new environment. So we had from João Peças Lopes a discussion of the challenges and the range of new solutions for grid stability, for grid resilience while integrating high levels of renewable energy sources. Then Clara Gouveia presented advancements in smart grid technologies, from network control centers, coordinated management, digital substations, also insights into how innovations related to flexible distributed energy resources, storage and microgrids can contribute also to enhancing grid resilience. José Villar told us about the role of markets in addressing future energy challenges. He highlighted the benefits and the challenges of markets that are already deployed, wholesale and retail markets, but also the role, the potential, and some constraints and challenges associated with emerging solutions, such as energy communities, local electricity markets, and local flexibility markets. And finally, Zenaida Mourão emphasized the importance of demand-side management in buildings. She brought us a focus on people-centric, healthy, participative, multi-energy and net zero buildings, and the role that digitalization can have in enhancing efficiency and flexibility. So this overall provided us, I think, a very insightful view on future demand-side strategies. So overall, the panel gave us an idea of the holistic and the systemic nature of the challenges that we have in this area, and so the need also for a holistic and systemic approach to addressing these challenges. And this has been also our strategy at INESC TEC. We have been actively combining diverse competencies that are required for this holistic approach, energy systems at the core, but reaching out to areas such as software, robotics, industrial management, and more. So leveraging this distinctive multidisciplinary nature of our institution and merging it with decades of experience across the whole electricity system value chain in studying these challenges has been our strategy in this area. We also highlighted the importance of infrastructure, and this goes from digital infrastructure to living labs, and the opportunities that we are increasingly exploring here, also in the bridging of the digital realm with the real world, and especially in living labs. So for instance, we have done work already for quite some time in the Portuguese archipelagos, in the Azores and Madeira, and INESC TEC has a recent pole in Madeira, and so these are very promising environments also to develop this kind of work. Moving to panel 2, and so coming closer to the sunset, to the promised sunset. We had an amazing panel. My favorite panels are always with PhD students or young researchers, so I was an easy win for this panel. A panel on the importance of creativity for research in the energy domain. So this is a topic that is critical nowadays. So creativity has always been a core concern in research, but as we increasingly see nowadays, AI-based approaches, being able to perform more and more knowledge tasks, better understanding and reframing the role of creativity and the relationship between research and researchers and creativity is becoming increasingly important. And so we started with Carla, and Carla discussed data markets in the energy sector. So she talked about the challenges and opportunities that the volume and variety of data that is increasingly available are bringing us. And the need to balance a number of concerns, privacy, proprietary data, with incentives of a monetary and non-monetary kind for this data sharing to come into place. Francisco discussed opportunities in evolving symbolic models to assist human operators in control rooms, and he provided and showed us a framework where you can combine supervised learning, reinforcement learning, incorporating an evolution frame, a motor of evolution, power system data, and power system models. These are all building blocks that are becoming available to provide functions that are able to enhance operator assistance. Carlos explored dynamic incentives for green electrical mobility. So he emphasized here the integration of mobility, energy, data services, illustrating all of this with a real world, actually working application in data-driven services for dynamic incentives in electric vehicle charging stations. He made clear how elasticity is a complex phenomena and how better data on elasticity is going to be important to unleash the development of tailored products and services and further support the energy transition by having a better characterization of consumers and elasticity of demand. And finally, Abdul discussed the interface between green hydrogen, in particular hydrogen electrolyzers and power electronics, and then the interface of all of these and the grid. He highlighted the need for adaptive controllers, active rectifiers, appropriate models to manage operations of solutions that are very complex and with a context-dependent operation complexity. So I would like to highlight here, in addition to the specific areas of creativity that all of them mentioned, that range from formulation, thinking of creative approaches, co-learning or co-creating with AI, how you can be more creative in earlier stage, more emerging developments or in nearer market developments. So I think that we had a good view of some of the different environments where creativity is important and how you can deploy it there. But I would like to highlight the fact that all of these are out-of-the-box advances that really sit at the interface of electricity systems and other areas. Areas such as mathematics, AI, mechanical engineering, human-computer interaction, the digital economy, digital business models, other sectors of the economy, and emerging solutions that are coming from other areas of science and technology. So it's very important at research and development institutions such as INESC TEC, and we try to do it, that we stimulate the creativity of our researchers in developing innovative solutions, and that we understand that our environment for creativity is changing and that we need to change and evolve and be more sophisticated in doing it, in particular with the emergence of AI and the way that it is taking with really high performance, many knowledge tasks. So nowadays it's more important, more than ever, to foster this creativity. So final word. As you know, so INESC TEC is a peculiar institution because we have a dual mission, and both sides of our mission are equally important for us. So part of our mission is scientific research. The other part of our mission is technology innovation, knowledge transfer, technology transfer. And we consider, and we, in our practice, make these two sides of our mission equally important, and we actively build and exploit the synergies between these parts. And so, this that is our DNA is very present in everything that we do. And I was extremely pleased with the concept of this event and to see how this dual-sided mission was very clearly, and I would say exemplary, present in this event today. So the dialogue and the exchange of ideas that we saw here clearly seek to bridge the enhanced understanding of energy and electricity systems that we are developing in our research, and they try to foster new ideas and the discussion of how we can bridge the gap between research and practical application. So the sketching of the shape of energy to come, that's the topic of the theme of this event, has built on this dual mission, and so we sought to bring you the way how we are contributing to the reliable and resilient electric grid of the future, building on the work that we have been doing in multiple projects, as I mentioned earlier, supply of security, grid expansion, active demand and consumption management, how we plan, what is our strategy to develop scalable solutions that are applicable not just in Portugal, but across Europe, leveraging digital infrastructure, leveraging infrastructure in the real world, such as living labs, and bridging between these two types of infrastructure. And finally, how within this new environment for research and for technology, with the recent advancements in AI, we are working to increasingly foster and promote and enhance the role of creativity in our activities. So in conclusion, I would like just to reiterate our thanks to all who made this event possible, from the participants and all their valuable contributions, there in the audience, here also on the stage, to the organizers, and a final comment is that if the interventions that we had today gave us a good view of the shape of energy to come, I have no doubt that this event is also itself a meaningful step in that shaping. It is an exemplary expression and a symbol of how we have this shaping in our hands and we can build a sustainable and innovative future for energy if we work together. So thank you, and we look forward to continuing this important work with all of you. And the practical guidelines now are that the sunset will take place in the same place where we had the coffee break. So see you downstairs in a few minutes.